For as long as I can remember, my parents have always been strict when it comes to what I read. They believe in shielding me from the dark side of literature, books they deemed inappropriate or dangerous, which often encompassed anything that challenged the status quo or stirred my imagination too vividly. This led to an interesting internal conflict for me. While I was desperate to escape into worlds full of adventure, mystery, and, yes, even the darkness they so feared, I felt trapped under their watchful eyes. It all began one chilly autumn afternoon when I stumbled upon an old box in the attic while searching for my winter clothes. Inside were worn-out paperbacks, the covers faded and spines cracked, titles that made my heart race with excitement just reading them. 1984. Fahrenheit 451, and even the perks of being a wallflower. I couldn't believe my luck. I rifled through the pages, inhaling the musty scent of forgotten stories, my mind racing with ideas of how I could read them undetected. So I devised a plan. I would lie about volunteering times at the local community center, creating a facade of altruism while I secretly lost myself in the pages of these banned books, snatching moments at home whenever I could, hidden in the dim light of my room, thoroughly engrossed in worlds that dared to challenge the ordinary. The thrill of reading each book was amplified by the tension of nearly being discovered. I can still feel the anxiety my heart would drum up as I heard my parents' footsteps approaching my room, the panic of tossing the book beneath my bed or pretending to be occupied with homework. Every day brought a renewed sense of rebellion, and though I felt guilty for lying, the joys of reading and the new perspectives I gained were intoxicating, filling parts of my soul that had felt stifled under my parents' protective grip. However, as the months went on, my deception began to weigh heavily on me, gnawing at my conscience like an unwelcome stranger. The guilt was persistent, a dark shadow that stretched longer with each borrowed moment spent in those fictional realms while my reality lay neglected. It felt like I was double living. One life as the dutiful daughter and another as a voracious reader devouring forbidden fruit. I found myself drawn into the narratives to escape the guilt, grappling with complex characters and moral dilemmas that had me questioning the very lines between right and wrong. The stories opened my eyes wider, forcing me to confront my own beliefs, and with each page turned, I realized more about myself than I had ever anticipated. Finally, the inevitable day came. I returned home earlier than usual from my volunteering, boisterous laughter echoing in the hallway as I overheard my parents discussing a recent scandal involving a local family, something that triggered my instinct to flee, the kind of wild and uncontrollable urge to hide, to keep my secrets tucked away from prying eyes. As I entered my room, barely able to breathe, I found myself staring at the open books piled on my desk, the pages fluttering in the gentle breeze from the cracked window. In that moment of reckoning, I found clarity. It wasn't just the thrill of the stories but what they taught me about facing truths. I had built this elaborate tapestry of lies, and it felt utterly exhausting. That night, after tossing and turning, I gathered the courage to write my parents a letter, something raw and heartfelt, confessing everything, the lies, the books, my need for understanding, and my thirst for knowledge. I left the letter on the kitchen table and went to bed, feeling strangely light, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. When I woke up the next morning, my parents were waiting, and my heart raced, not with fear but hope. What followed was a lengthy conversation filled with unexpected discoveries. My parents shared their own fears about the world, how they wanted to protect me from the confusion and chaos that could come from confronting uncomfortable truths too soon. In the end, I found out that they were more open than I had ever imagined, their love for me woven tightly with their fears, and together, we discussed what I had read. I had anticipated rejection, but instead, I found a middle ground. A new agreement where we could explore literature together, perhaps even tackling some of those challenging books as a family. Looking back, it wasn't only about the thrill of defiance, it was about forging deeper connections through honesty. Now, about 6 months later, the shadows of guilt have dimmed, replaced by a deeper understanding between my parents and me, an understanding that has allowed me to step into the world of literature freely, knowing that while the stories may challenge us, they also connect us in the most profound ways. My mom even recommended a few books of her own, and I often find us discussing the very themes that used to frighten me. Sometimes I wonder, if I had never lied, would we have ever reached this point of openness? The irony of my confession becoming a bridge instead of a chasm still lingers, a perfect reminder that sometimes honesty is the doorway to liberation. And as the weeks rolled on, I found myself embracing not just the books I had once furtively devoured, but also a genuine relationship with my parents that had blossomed from my initial deception. The irony persisted like a quiet echo in my mind. What had begun as a mere act of rebellion had paved the way for understanding, empathy, and connection. Our late-night discussions started to feel more like exchanges between equals instead of the monologues I once dreaded. For the first time, I could speak freely, my tentative words met with thoughtful consideration rather than dismissiveness. My mom, whose narrow view of the world had previously felt like a cage, revealed layers I had never seen. She spoke of her own teenage years of confusion and rebellion, of the tightly bound expectations surrounding her, of books she had longed to read but felt were never provided for her. It was a two-way street, paved with vulnerability and mutual respect, and I often imagine that many parents in the world might also find themselves carrying unexamined fears and baggage that color their judgments. My father surprised me when, during one of those evenings, he pulled out a well-worn copy of 1984 from a shelf, a silent testament to his own teenage curiosity. He read passages aloud, his voice rising and falling like a gentle wave, and I sat transfixed, watching as he began to articulate thoughts he had held back for years. The stories we shared soon morphed into discussions about freedom, censorship, and the ways in which the world often seeks to bind us with invisible chains. They were discussions that blurred the lines between parent and child, inviting me to express my own thoughts about why the narratives of the past were as relevant today as they had ever been. As these conversations expanded our world, I noticed subtle shifts in my parents' demeanor. The tension that often filled the air, the silent judgments exchanged during dinner, began to dissipate, replaced by questions that probed deeper than just homework or weekend plans. I revealed, in time, my hidden treasure trove of other books, banned or otherwise, in a hesitant effort, expecting disbelief or reprimand, yet their only response was curiosity, a desire to understand why I was drawn to those particular narratives. My parents eventually suggested we read one of my secret titles together, creating a new family tradition around literature. I chose The Catcher in the Rye, a coming-of-age saga that had once tempted me to stretch my own boundaries. The first time we sat down to read it together, I felt a mix of anxiety and excitement, fully aware that we were traversing territory once deemed taboo, and I held my breath, anticipating any possible ripples of discomfort. Oddly enough, all those frayed edges yielded softness. My father's laughter during Holden's quirks and my mother sitting quietly through the emotional turmoil was strangely comforting. With every shared passage, every discerning glance or nod in agreement, I sensed the walls between us continuing to dissolve further, brick by brick. It became clear that for all the hidden chapters of our lives, honesty had acted as the ink that penned a renewed narrative for our family. Relaying my experiences became a healing process, not just for me, but for them, too. It was as if we had embarked on a literary quest together, confronting harsh truths, handling abrasive characters, and making sense of complex emotions that each book evoked. The old fears I had felt about them severing ties, if I confess, turned into rays of understanding, defying any expectation. It was hard to believe I once feared their judgment. These moments of connection had become both a refuge and a revelation. We initiated a new phase in our family life centered on exploration and acceptance, each book we read together leading us to deeper conversations that demanded both vulnerability and courage. Through our shared experiences, we began to explore the world outside our home, conversing about its many wonders long after the books were closed. Months later, during a warm autumn evening, as we wrapped ourselves in cozy blankets on the porch, my heart swelled with gratitude. We shared our latest reads, each story a testament to the struggles and strengths of human experience, and the laughter that enveloped us felt as natural as the rustling leaves around us. When the conversation culminated in my unique tale of deception, I chuckled, recalling how artfully I had woven my narrative of lies. I remarked, only half-jokingly, how ironic it was that this all turned out for the best. My mom chuckled softly, a knowing smile dancing on her lips. "Isn't it funny," she mused, "how a little lie can lead to something so honest?" In that moment, as we exchanged gentle glances full of unspoken understandings, I fully grasped the power of stories, not merely as vessels of adventure or lessons learned, but as bridges built, connecting us in our humanity. For now, honesty had become our family's new currency, one that brought us closer than I ever could have imagined, and I fell asleep that night with the warmth of 1,000 shared tales cradling me, a soothing reminder of how beautifully complex and connected our lives had become. For a while, everything felt perfect, a harmonious balance in our family life nurtured through dialogue and literature. But then a curious thing happened that unfurled the next chapter of this journey. One late evening, rummaging through the attic for forgotten treasures, I unearthed an old box of my childhood belongings. Inside, I found remnants of an earlier life, old drawings, fading notes from friends, and buried amidst them, a diary I had kept for a year during my most rebellious phase. The pages brimmed with unfiltered thoughts, confessions of secret readings and deep fears about my parents' approval. Feeling a blend of nostalgia and unease, I realized that the words captured the essence of my past dilemma. They chronicled the very thoughts that had driven me to the lies. I considered sharing it with my parents. After all, the thoughts had initially shaped my deceit. But fear momentarily gripped me, a faint shadow of my earlier self-research. Would dragging those old fears back into the light disrupt the harmony we had built? After days of contemplation, I summoned the courage to share the diary with my parents. Sitting down at the dinner table, I felt the weight of history in the room, a convergence of past and present that felt very much alive. I passed the diary to my mom, my fingers trembling slightly at the thought of her reading the truths I'd buried. As she opened the first page, memories flooded back. She read quietly, her brow furrowed in both understanding and concern. I watched as she turned each page, witnessing how a simple diary could weave together those early insecurities and another layer of connection. She finally closed it with a gentle sigh, glancing at my father, who appeared equally reflective. "You know," my father spoke, breaking the silence, "this was a part of you we never got to see. I can't say I understand all of it, but I do now see how much you struggled. Thank you for sharing it with us." And in that moment of quiet acceptance, I understood that honesty, in all its forms, whether born from rebellion or vulnerability, took courage, but it also laid the foundation for deeper understanding. The past need not lie dormant in dusty boxes, but rather could be embraced as a means of connection and growth. Despite the initial uncertainty of sharing my old fears, I left the table feeling lighter, our family bond stronger than ever before. We had created a new chapter, built not solely on the foundation of literature, but also crafted from our shared experiences and vulnerabilities. Each story, whether fictional or a fragment of my truth, became a testament to our journey, endless, evolving, filled with laughter, love, and the deeper insights that accompany growing together. As I settled into bed that night, cradling the precious diary close, I drifted off to sleep with a serene heart, attuned to the quiet yet powerful echoes of connection that continued to resonate through our lives. The next morning brought with it the gentle warmth of sunlight filtering through the curtains, casting soft shadows on the walls like a whispered promise of new beginnings. I awoke with a sense of peace that felt almost surreal. The weight of my secret had been lifted, replaced by an openness I had never before believed could exist in my family. As I padded down the hallway, thoughts fluttered like the pages of my books, bubbling with excitement about the conversations that awaited me. The kitchen was alive with the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of my dad's humming, a melody that had always signified comfort. My mom, noticing my entrance, looked up from her morning ritual of arranging a bright bouquet of wildflowers on the table and greeted me with a smile that seemed to radiate warmth. We sat together over breakfast, and with each bite, I could sense a new current flowing through our dialogue. My parents were no longer just the guardians of my childhood, they were becoming partners in discovery, sharing their own experiences with books and stories that shaped their understanding of the world. It felt refreshing to dive into discussions about themes of humanity, society, and the myriad emotions that literature can evoke. My mom spoke passionately about a book she had recently read, one that dealt with the struggles of inner identity, while my dad recounted his youth, the challenges he faced, and how a simple novel had provided him solace during difficult times. Their stories alternated like a harmonious dance, weaving together our past and present in a new narrative tapestry infused with honesty and vulnerability. I couldn't help but marvel at how my once solitary escape into these worlds now had the potential to deepen my relationships. As the days turned into weeks, our family dinners evolved into literary discussions, each session igniting laughter and thoughtful exchanges, where we dissected characters and plots as if they were family members we were getting to know. My parents often encouraged me to share insights from the books I was reading on my own, and I accepted this challenge with relish. The more I expressed myself, the more the barriers I had felt began to dissolve, replaced by a buoyancy of mutual respect that transformed our dynamics. I discovered a deep, collective joy in these moments, the kind that fosters a profound sense of belonging. One evening, after discussing the fine line between courage and foolishness found within a particular story, my mom turned to me, her eyes glimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you for trusting us," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Your honesty opened doors we didn't even know were closed." Her words struck me with such weight, I measured their impact against my fears, realizing how misguided I had been to think that my concerns would render our family fragile. As I began to pen down my musings one quiet night, the diary now filled with memories and reflections, I relished the way words served as both a mirror and a window into my evolving self. I was growing, learning how to embrace the power of truth not just for my sake but for the sake of the love that already enveloped us. And while the act of deception had initially felt like a choice born of fear, the reckoning brought clarity, revealing pathways I could never have envisioned before. Just last week, we gathered in the living room to host a movie night inspired by a classic we had all read together. As the opening credits rolled, I caught my dad grinning as he nudged my mom, whispering a particularly funny line to her that had caught his fancy from the book. That shared chuckle was electrifying, a poignant moment that affirmed what we had built, a space where laughter and the wisdom of stories intermingled freely, a sanctuary for our expressions. As we settled in to watch, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me, realizing that within those walls, we had created a fortress of understanding forged through the power of narrative. As my eyelids grew heavy against the backdrop of flickering images and communal laughter, I felt comforted by the thought that my journey had only just begun, that there were more chapters yet to unfold, rich with the echoes of voices we love and lessons that continue to challenge and inspire us. And in that tranquil embrace of twilight, I drifted into sleep, dreaming of adventures yet to be written together, knowing that the words would flow between us and carry us forward in the intricate tapestry of our lives. It was one of those mundane evenings that seemed endless, marked by the soft glow of my laptop screen illuminating my small, cluttered apartment. Like many of us do these days, I found myself scrolling through social media, half paying attention to the world around me. I had recently moved back to my hometown after college, trying to settle into a routine that felt both familiar and painfully dull. I wasn't particularly in touch with my old friends anymore, but every now and then, I would receive a random friend request or notification from them, invoking fond memories and a tinge of nostalgia. That evening, however, the mundane spiraled into the unexpected as I stumbled onto something I wish I hadn't. While sifting through my usual lineup of memes and pet videos, I came across a post from Jordan, my old high school friend. He had shared a link that, out of sheer curiosity, I clicked on. That's when I was greeted with a highly explicit video, featuring none other than him. My heart jumped, I could hardly process what I was seeing. The shock wasn't just in the content itself, it was the raw surrealism of seeing someone I grew up with in such an intimate and revealing situation, a stark contrast to the goofy teenager I remembered. I felt that disorienting blend of disbelief and uncomfortable intrigue, my brain racing through the implications. How did this happen? Did he know it was out there? I spent the next few days wrapped in a haze of confusion and guilt. I often wondered whether I should reach out to Jordan, but the fear of crossing a line haunted me. What would I even say? "Hey, I found your video online?" The words felt ridiculous and invasive. I kept telling myself that maybe it was just a fluke of the internet, and that I should let it go, but every time I scrolled past his social media profiles, I felt a pang of disturbance, as if our past friendship was tainted by this unintended discovery. The thought spiraled in my mind, was he okay? Was anyone else aware of this? Was it being shared? I waded through the murky waters of my emotions. I didn't want to objectify him or reduce him to a single, damaging narrative, but I couldn't shake my anxiety about whether he was aware of what was happening behind the scenes of his online persona. After wrestling with myself for a week, I finally found the courage to send him a message, accompanied by a deep breath and the sincerity of a friend. I typed and retyped my words, carefully choosing my tone, desperate to tread lightly. "Hey, I know this might sound weird, but I came across something online and I wanted to check in with you." When he responded, it took me completely by surprise. At first, there was a simple, bemused acknowledgement of my message, but then his tone shifted. "Yeah, I guess it's out there. I thought I could trust that guy with my private videos, but turns out that wasn't the smartest decision." Reading his words, I felt a wave of empathy wash over me. There was no anger or embarrassment in his reply, just a resigned acceptance of the mishap, an acknowledgement of his choices, the nature of trust and intimacy in this digital age. It felt like a weight lifted, an opening for genuine conversation, as we ended up chatting late into the night, reminiscing about school days while skirting around the awkwardness that had initially bridged us together. With every message exchanged, I realized how important it was to extend our understanding to one another, to let each other live beyond the confines of our past selves, and come to terms with our humanity, flaws and all. As days turned into weeks, Jordan and I gradually rebuilt our friendship. He shared more about his experience, how the moment had taught him to be more careful with his choices online. I admired his resilience, how he embraced this new reality instead of hiding from it. It became clear that the incident, while unfortunate, had led to a deeper understanding of trust and vulnerability in relationships, guiding both of us into a more profound and honest connection with each other. Eventually, that unexpected thread that had linked the two of us, so fraught but necessary, loomed large, creating a bridge that carried us forward. In the end, I learned that sometimes shocking experiences can shake us into clarity, reminding us that life, with its highs and lows, is ultimately built on the connections we forge. As I closed my laptop that night, I carried with me a newfound appreciation for the intricacies of friendship, and the delicate balance between vulnerability and trust. Update: a few months later, Jordan launched a podcast where he shared his journey through self-acceptance and the complexities of personal identity in the digital age. I was honored to be one of his first guests, and that raw conversation turned into something both healing and empowering for us both. As I sat across from Jordan in that small, cozy recording studio, the walls adorned with vibrant artwork and a soft rug beneath our feet, the atmosphere was infused with a sense of purpose that transcended our initial fears. It was as if we were stepping onto a stage, but instead of an audience of strangers, we were merely two friends, each sharing pieces of ourselves we had once kept hidden. I watched as he adjusted the microphone, his brow furrowing in concentration while he recalled the uphill battle of self-acceptance. In that moment, I remembered the raw feeling that had surged within me when I stumbled upon his NSFW photos months earlier, how they had unraveled my world and spun it into a tangled web of confusion, admiration, and guilt. It had felt so surreal, and I scarcely imagined that we would come to share such a profound journey afterward. We dove deep into discussions about identity, not only his but also mine, finding solace in the confession of our experiences in a world that often felt too demanding. With each passing moment, the podcast transformed from a simple sharing of stories into a patchwork of vulnerability, where we challenged the notions of expectation and fear surrounding our identities. I spoke of my initial reaction to his photos, of feeling conflicted between admiration for his confidence and a strange betrayal of our friendship, and how I grappled with the realization that vulnerability could be a bridge rather than a divide. Jordan listened intently, his eyes lighting up as I described the turmoil of wanting to reach out and support him while also grappling with my own insecurities about my perceptions. The air was thick with honesty and connection, two elements that had previously felt so far removed. By the time we wrapped up the session, the sun had begun to set, casting a warm glow through the studio window that felt like a blessing on our shared vulnerability. We spent a moment in comfortable silence, reflecting on how this had become more than just a podcast episode. It was a turning point for both of us. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. I realized that those experiences we endured, the unexpected discoveries and the moments of raw honesty, had transformed us into individuals who understood the nuanced dance of connection in an often fragmented world. There was an unspoken promise that despite the myriad of uncertainties life tosses our way, we would navigate the full spectrum of emotions together. The podcast episode aired 2 weeks later, and it was shared amongst our friends and family, leading to conversations we could have only dreamed of having before. Reactions varied, some were supportive, others cautious, but the thread of understanding was woven throughout, sparking a gentle dialogue about identity and acceptance. In the coming months, our friendship deepened, evolving into a safe space where we bared our hopes and fears without reservation. It became clear that our experiences were merely the starting points. Together, we explored deeper conversations about what it meant to express love and vulnerability in friendships, touching on the fears that kept people isolated and ashamed of their authentic selves. Jordan received messages from intrigued listeners who found strength in his story and our conversation, and I would sometimes smile at how far we had come from that initial moment of discomfort and confusion. Not long after, I decided to create a blog inspired by our discussions, focusing on mental well-being and the beauty of genuine connections. It was cathartic, and eventually, it blossomed into a platform for others to share their truths. As I wrapped up a thoughtful post late one night, reflecting on the delicate balance of trust and vulnerability, I glanced over at my notification feed to discover a message from one of my readers. It was a heartfelt letter from someone who identified with the struggles of acceptance and the fear of being judged, who thanked me for sharing my story. In that moment, I felt a comforting realization settle in. Our lives are often a mosaic crafted from our connections, our fears, our stories, and the way we choose to understand them. And as these exchanges trickled down the corridors of time, I felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing we were building something beyond ourselves, creating waves of understanding and acceptance for anyone who dared to share their journey. In the weeks that followed that moment, I found myself enveloped in an unforeseen sense of purpose. Writing was a refuge, a way to untangle the complexities of my thoughts while forging connections in a broader world. The glowing screen of my laptop became a portal not just for sharing my own experiences, but for inviting others into a dialogue. I began to receive letters not only from those grappling with their own identity but from a diverse tapestry of voices, friends, family, and even strangers, all reaching out in vulnerability. Each note was a thread weaving together a larger narrative of shared humanity, and with every message, I felt the weight of my previous fears begin to lift, like a fog that dissipates under warm sunlight. As Jordan's podcast gained traction, our conversations drew in an audience hungry for authenticity. He had a talent for cultivating a space where stories flowed freely, and I watched as people opened up about their own experiences, revealing the wounds they carried, the battles they fought in silence. Every episode was a reminder that we were not alone, that the threads of our lives were interconnected, even if we often felt like solitary travelers on our respective journeys. The therapeutic richness of our discussions resonated so powerfully that we considered live sessions, inviting our listeners to join in and share their stories, live and unfiltered. One evening, after a particularly moving episode, I laid on my couch, gazing at the ceiling, thoughts swirling in my mind. I remembered my own journey, the immense weight of fear I had endured when I unearthed Jordan's NSFW content. It had initially felt like a betrayal, a rupture in the fabric of our friendship. Yet, now, it appeared as merely a chapter in a broader narrative of growth, acceptance, and deeper understanding. As I turned those ideas over, I started to pen my thoughts, a reflection on how fear can isolate us but also push us toward clarity and connection. Weeks later, after I shared my reflections in one of our episodes, a woman named Mia reached out. She was searching for solace in a tumultuous sea of self-doubt after experiencing something deeply personal, a shocking revelation from her best friend who had suffered through similar battles of identity. Mia's note was laced with pain, courage, and a hint of hope, and as I read her words, my heart swelled with empathy. I felt a calling, a collective responsibility to channel our experiences into something constructive for others, to transform our authentic exchanges into healing touchstones. Eventually, we scheduled a collaborative session where Mia could join us on air, a chance to share her story with vulnerability. The three of us chatted before recording, and I could sense Mia's hesitation. What if no one understands? She shared, the tremor in her voice betraying her fears. In a reassuring tone, I replied, "That's the beauty of sharing. Even if just one person listens and feels seen, it's worth it." With the warmth of our shared energies wrapping around us, we pressed record, and Mia shared more than I could have hoped. Her authentic vulnerability inspired a flood of comments from listeners, people sharing their own experiences of love, loss, and the rawness of existence. After that episode, our community grew exponentially. Messages poured in, and together, we navigated through backstories of fear, courage, and redemption. Each tale felt like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, slowly creating a whole that was more vibrant than I could have imagined. Through these interactions, I learned that vulnerability weaves the strongest bonds, tying hearts together in a way superficial connections never could. Months later, during a live session that felt charged with energy and authenticity, I reflected on how far we'd come. I could hear the hushed whispers of other shared stories around me, an orchestra of human experiences blending into a comforting harmony. As we concluded, a listener's message popped up, someone thankful for the community we had fostered, expressing how the space made them feel seen for the first time in years. I shared that note aloud, feeling a lump forming in my throat. My heart brimmed with gratitude, a sense of belonging rising within me. This journey began with fear but transformed into something profound, an unabashed embracing of humanity's stories. As I closed my laptop that night, I understood that life is not merely a collection of moments but rather the bonds we forge amidst them, powerful connections that flourish in the soft glow of empathy. I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We were not just sharing stories anymore, we were nurturing a sanctuary where fears could be laid bare, acceptance could blossom, and every voice, even those hidden in the shadows, could resonate with truth. It was in this space that we truly found ourselves, each other, and the collective light we were meant to share. Confession: I am so desperate to be seen naked, so I go to saunas. It feels strange to admit this, but it's the truth that's been burrowing itself deeper into my mind with each passing day. I grew up feeling invisible, always blending into the wallpaper of my life, and as I moved into adulthood, that sense of anonymity settled uncomfortably within me. I work in a corporate office where everyone wears the same bland suits, and despite my attempts to connect with my coworkers, I often feel like a ghost, drifting through the hallways unnoticed. The idea of being seen, truly seen, without the barrier of clothing, began as a whisper in the back of my mind during one of those long, disheartening days at work. After overhearing a few colleagues share stories about their trips to a local sauna, Where they'd experienced an exhilarating sense of liberation, I decided to find a place and give it a try myself. The first time I stepped into the sauna, my heart was racing, not just from the heat enveloping me like a warm blanket, but from the thrill of stepping outside my comfort zone. I had chosen the hour when it's typically quieter, just me and the relief of the steam filling the space, the sound of water softly bubbling in the corner. I cautiously peeled off my towel, each moment feeling like a revelation, as I sat there, the heat seeping into my skin, electrifying my senses. With my eyes closed, I could almost believe I was invisible, like a part of the soothing steam that wrapped around me. The first few visits were largely uneventful, just contemplative time alone in a shared space, but it soon became clear to me that there was tension brewing underneath my seemingly innocent nudity. I realized that what I truly craved was not just the warmth of the sauna but the comfort of being openly vulnerable, stripped of societal expectations and judgments. I watched individuals come and go, their conversations floating around me, laughter spilling over easily, creating an inviting atmosphere that I had never felt before in my corporate life. Then came the turning point, an unexpected encounter with a woman named Elena. She entered one day, radiating confidence and ease, and immediately captured my attention without saying a word. She settled across from me, the soft light reflected in the steam floating around us, and as I caught her gaze, I felt the gravity of my own vulnerability. I longed for her approval, her attention, thinking that perhaps this was what I had been seeking all along, affirmation in the starkness of our nakedness. We shared some small talk, the pleasantries of strangers slowly blossoming into something more intimate over the weeks. With each conversation, I found myself more drawn to her, but also more terrified of the vulnerability I was exposing. My thoughts spiraled, wondering if she saw me as I wished to be seen or simply another body in the steam. The emotional swell of confusion and desire became exhausting. I enjoyed our chats deeply, yet held the shame of my intentions just under the surface, pondering if I was chasing this connection or merely hiding behind my longing for attention. As the weeks rolled on, I noticed that every visit became a mix of dread and excitement. My chest would tighten as I approached the sauna entrance, the prospect of encountering Elena twisting my insides like the steam swirling around me. On one particularly humid afternoon, I took my place beside her, the air charged with unsaid words and unacknowledged feelings, our bodies so close yet worlds apart. There was a fragility in the air, and it struck me then, how desperately I craved to leave my mark on this life, to be more than a nameless figure fading into the background. That day, amidst the soft drumming of my heart and the subtle scent of eucalyptus enveloping us, I confessed to Elena my struggles with invisibility, the anxiety of being overlooked in life, and, most fearfully, my unacknowledged desperation for validation. I spoke with a rawness I hadn't anticipated, spilling my truths like the sweat beating on my skin. To my surprise, Elena didn't recoil. Instead, she shared her own experiences, admitting that she, too, had felt the loneliness of being misunderstood and the joy found in being seen, not only by others but by herself. We talked for hours, our walls melting away along with the sauna's heat, unveiling not just our vulnerability but a meaningful connection that provided solace and strength. In retrospect, I realized that it was never about the nakedness or the sauna itself, it was about the courage to be seen, truly seen, and for once in my life, I felt a spark of clarity. I found freedom in vulnerability, and the comforting notion that seeking connection, while fraught with uncertainty, can yield the most extraordinary transformations. In the days that followed, my visits became less about mere exposure and more about self-acceptance and the burgeoning friendship I had with Elena. No longer was I the desperate individual solely yearning for attention, rather, I embraced my intersectionality of longing and companionship. We continued to meet, spending lazy afternoons wrapped in the comfort of our thoughts, but now, it infused with laughter and a shared understanding. The sauna, once a symbol of my vulnerabilities, had transformed into a sacred space of connection and healing. Update: a few months have passed since those revealing confessions in that steamy sanctuary, and I'm happy to report that Elena and I have grown much closer. We even explored the possibility of a romantic relationship, stepping into a world where intimacy flourishes and being seen as an everyday luxury rather than a rare obligation. I'm still learning to embrace my nakedness, not only in the physical sense but emotionally as well, and I find solace knowing that opening myself up to someone else has yielded greater rewards than I initially sought. The sauna has become our special haven, gradually shifting from a symbol of desperation to one of hope and companionship. It remains a vibrant reminder that the quest to be seen can lead to beautiful connections and unexpected transformations. Looking back over the last few months, I realize how far I've come, How those tense moments spent alone in the sauna have morphed into shared laughter and gentle conversations that flow like the steam that envelops us. Marcus, my newfound companion in this intimate journey, has changed the way I perceive not only my own nakedness but also the vulnerability that comes with allowing someone else into those raw spaces of my life. When we first met, it was just me, sitting quietly, wrapped in the warmth of the cedar walls, eyes closed, my mind wandering to all the causes of my insecurities, the memories of feeling invisible in crowds, of being a spectator in my own life. Then came the day he slid open the heavy door, steam curling into the air like whispers of hidden secrets, and settled down beside me. His presence was unexpected, yet there was a calming assurance in the way he carried himself. We exchanged a few pleasantries, both wrapped in our towels, sharing shy smiles, but there was an undercurrent of drawn tension, the kind that happens when you sense that your life is about to shift in an undeniable way. With each visit, we found ourselves gravitating closer to one another, our separate journeys of discovery weaving a tapestry of shared experiences that grew richer with every passing hour. As the weeks passed, our conversations developed from nervous giggles and banalities into deeper discussions about life, dreams, and fears. I learned that Marcus, too, had been seeking liberation, that he had spent years suffocated by the expectations of others, the weight of carefully constructed facades. Our private sanctuary became a place where the disrobing of clothes was merely the beginning. It was in shedding our emotional armor, the layers of pretense, that we truly began to flourish. In the gentle heat of the sauna, we learned to respect each other's boundaries, to explore the outlines of our souls without rushing into intimacy, allowing the space for trust to develop at its own pace. Once, after a particularly profound conversation, when I spoke about my childhood struggles, Marcus took my hand in his and squeezed it gently, a simple gesture that conveyed understanding more profoundly than words ever could. In those moments, I realized that the desperation I once felt to be seen merely stripped away layers of armor. What I truly craved was connection, understanding, and love in its purest forms. It was during a twilight evening at the sauna, the world outside fading into a whisper of cool air contrasted against the steamy warmth inside, that everything shifted. Surrounded by the musky scent of eucalyptus and soft flickering light, we made a pact, not just for the two of us but also to continue this newfound exploration with others. The brave act of being naked in front of one another became a metaphor for the kind of vulnerability and openness we wanted to cultivate not only in our growing affection but in our interactions with the outside world. Inspired by the freedom we found together, we began inviting others to join us in these discussions, people from our lives who struggled with their own insecurities or simply desired a safe space to explore their personal journeys. Little by little, our sauna transformed from a place of self-sought desperation into a community of sincerity, growth, and acceptance. As we gathered more often, the sound of laughter, shared stories, and the comfort of bare skin against warm wood turned our sanctuary into a fragrant blend of healing and camaraderie. It was intoxicating, watching as people uncovered themselves, both in body and spirit, fighting the urge to conform to societal standards. And within this newly formed tribe, I felt strength swell within me. Each person who walked through the door reinforced my belief that every struggle to be seen, to be understood, was an essential step on the path toward authentic relationships. It felt as if we were reclaiming the narrative of our lives together, each of us no longer afraid to emerge from the shadows into the light of acceptance. And so, as I sit here, reflecting on the journey from volunteering to be vulnerable to creating a safe harbor for others, I've come to realize that sometimes desperation leads us to unexpected places. The quest to be seen has morphed into a brighter vision of companionship, insight, and the realization that we are not meant to navigate these experiences alone. Each of us, stripped bare of judgment and fear, finds that true connection happens not in the obscured corners of our lives but in the shared spaces where our souls can breathe freely. Update: after the last sauna gathering, I've become more adventurous. We decided to organize a weekend retreat dedicated to embracing ourselves wholly, physically and emotionally. I never expected my search for visibility to blossom into this beautiful community. Marcus and I are exploring the next steps of our relationship, and I can genuinely say that I am learning to lift the veil of self-doubt not through sheer will, but through the love and support that surrounds me. Whether we pull it off or not remains to be seen, but if the sauna has taught me anything, it's the power of opening up, letting go, and letting the warmth of camaraderie wrap around you like a cozy embrace. As I stepped into the sauna that evening, a familiar warmth enveloped me, bringing with it an intoxicating mix of steam and laughter. It was a bustling Friday night, which meant the atmosphere was alive with friendly chatter and the soft sounds of splashes from a nearby hot tub. The scent of eucalyptus wafted through the air, mingling with the hint of soft skin meeting wooden benches, making it feel sacred, almost like a sanctuary. I glanced over at Marcus as he entered, his bright smile instantly lifting my spirits. We've come to cherish our time here, not merely as a shared space but as a canvas for our blossoming relationship, one filled with light-hearted conversations and moments of silence that spoke volumes. I was beginning to realize that my craving for being seen wasn't solely about the physical act of bearing myself, it was a deeper yearning for connection, a desire to let people into the raw honesty of who I was beneath those layers of skin and self-perception. As we settled onto the wide bench, I found myself reflecting on a recent conversation. Just the week prior, Amy, one of our more outspoken sauna friends, had playfully nudged me to consider how nakedness could serve as a metaphor for vulnerability, not just the absence of clothes but the shedding of emotional armor. When we strip away our insecurities and let ourselves be authentic, she said, her words dripping with warmth like the condensation on the windows, that's when we truly connect. I felt the gentle stirring of something profound within me as I came to terms with how much I held back for fear of judgment and rejection. I looked at Marcus, seeing the way he spoke with his hands, how his laughter invited me to lose myself in the moment, and I realized he didn't just see my naked body, he appreciated the layers beneath my skin, the quirks and vulnerabilities that made me who I was. As our conversations meandered that night, jumping from the silliness of everyday mishaps to deeper discussions about our childhood dreams, I found myself suspended in a state of blissful existence, fully engaged and present. I had never felt more seen or valued. The sauna, once a space I frequented out of desperation, evolved into a cherished place where affection and honesty flourished, entirely transforming my initial yearning into something profoundly beautiful. Eventually, as the water swirled softly around us, I took a leap into the depths of my thoughts without hesitation. You know, Marcus, I began, my voice a touch steadier than I anticipated, it's funny how this all started as a quest to be seen in a physical sense, but now, it feels like it's grown so much more. He nodded, eyes sparkling in the dappled light, and urged me to continue with a gentle smile, his presence radiating reassurance. I spoke of my evolving relationship with vulnerability, about how I was slowly dismantling the walls I erected around my heart and mind. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what it means to be comfortable in my own skin, not just physically, but emotionally too. The softening of his gaze communicated an understanding far deeper than words could convey. In that cocoon of warmth and acceptance, I felt a piece of my heart unlock, allowing all that I had grappled with to flow freely like the steam around us. Our laughter melded with the soft patter of the water, and under the weight of those shared moments, I began to acknowledge my fears of inadequacy. It felt liberating to confess my doubts, to speak them into existence rather than bottle them up. As the session waned, dipping into the cooler air felt almost shocking, and yet exhilarating. A shared promise hung between us, unsaid yet deeply felt, that we would continue to explore this newfound connection. In that moment, I realized that being seen had transformed from a desperate craving into a warm badge of courage. The sauna had taught me to embrace not just the warmth of physical presence but the raw, tender exposure of the spirit beneath, open, honest, and, above all, human. As we exited, laughter trailing behind us, I understood that true connection thrives not just in being seen, but in being trusted, loved, and cherished for the entirety of who we are. Months have passed since that first fateful leap into a realm of vulnerability, and now, as I reflect on my journey, I feel a sense of profound gratitude wash over me like that soothing sauna steam. Marcus and I have grown closer, delighting in every moment, be it within the warm embrace of the sauna or in our everyday lives, embracing our naked truths together. For those yearning to be seen, I've learned that the warmth of companionship is not found in the act of exposing one's body, but in revealing the colorful tapestry of our souls. Not long ago, I had approached the sauna searching for visibility, yet I now find myself standing on the precipice of belonging, hopeful of the future and eager for each moment yet to come. And with that thought, I know I'm ready to face whatever lies ahead, no longer just desperate to be seen, but content in the love and acceptance that dwells not just in places warm with steam, but in the deep recesses of my heart where understanding intertwines with connection, ready to embrace life in all its beautiful, naked moments. I remember the morning of my first job interview as if it were yesterday, a mix of excitement and dread swirling inside me like a storm waiting to break. Fresh out of college, I was desperate for my first big break, the kind of opportunity that would finally let me escape the confines of my parents' house, where the walls seemed to echo with expectations and every conversation felt more like an interrogation. I had settled into the interview office, a room perfumed with the faint scent of peppermint and polished wood, the kind of place where dreams were supposed to begin but often fizzled into disappointments. My interviewer, a middle-aged man named Mr. Henley, had a warm smile that immediately put me at ease, or at least as at ease as one could feel when the weight of one's future hung in the balance. As he flipped through my resume, he made small talk, commenting on my university experiences, and I felt a strange sense of connection. We laughed over shared memories of late-night studying and caffeine overloads. Yet, as the questions turned serious, I began to feel the undertow of tension, as if our pleasant exchange was concealing a rapidly rising tide. The questions grew increasingly rigorous, probing into my past experiences, and that's when I noticed it, the subtle red flags that flickered in the depths of his expressions. A tightness around his eyes when I mentioned my volunteer work, a barely noticeable sigh when I talked about my time in group projects. I brushed it off at first, thinking I was simply reading too much into things. After all, this was just an interview, right? But as I articulated my vision for the future and the contributions I believed I could make to his organization, I caught a flicker of disappointment cross his face, as though I had disappointed him before I even began. The day soon morphed into an unexpected display of emotional vulnerability as I detailed my volunteer experiences, explaining how they shaped my views on teamwork and leadership. Mr. Henley nodded along, but there was a waning enthusiasm in his body language, an almost imperceptible retreat that made my heart sink. Somewhere inside, I suddenly felt the urge to justify myself, to explain why my life was a patchwork of different ventures rather than the linear path he seemed to be hoping for. The interview dragged on, each question exposing the gulf between what I thought he wanted to hear and what I needed to say. I could sense the distance growing with each passing moment, and as I exited the office, I wondered if I had left a piece of myself behind, if perhaps I had seemed too disorganized in a world that revered neat, clean lines. Days passed, each waking moment overshadowed by a gnawing doubt about my future, until finally, I received the email I had both dreaded and anticipated. "Thank you for your application," it started, and my heart sank further as words like regret and fit screamed at me from the screen. I spent that evening wallowing in self-pity, questioning my approach and feeling the weight of my perceived failures, replaying the interview in my mind over and over again. But there, amidst the waves of despair, a simple realization began to surface. I had been so preoccupied with their expectations that I had lost sight of my own identity. Slowly, I started crafting my narrative in my head, embracing the idea that my journey didn't have to mirror others' journeys to be valid or worthwhile. It was a winding path, a landscape of lessons learned, which would ultimately prepare me for opportunities that truly resonated with my spirit. I began applying for more positions, shifting my focus onto companies whose values aligned with my own. The healing was gradual but vital. I delved into further volunteering, enhancing my skill set, and forming connections that felt genuine. The process felt less like a chore and more like a journey, with growth nestled in every bump along the road. Finally, after weeks of uncertainty and with a renewed sense of purpose, I received a call from another firm, a startup with a mission that spoke directly to me. I didn't just want to rush into this new opportunity. For the first time, I felt equipped to be myself, to genuinely convey my experiences and beliefs. This time, when I stepped into the interview, the air felt different, and rather than presenting a facade, it was just me and my authentic journey. The room radiated warmth, and while the questions were still probing, I was met with shared smiles and nods of understanding. As I walked out, I felt a calm triumph wash over me, knowing that I had given my story wings. It was about much more than the job, it was a sincere expression of who I was, and I realized that discovering the right fit was about more than avoiding red flags, it was about embracing the search for places where my passions could thrive. Update: it's been a couple of months since I started my new job, and I can't express how right it feels. I've learned that the most significant red flags aren't just in the interviewers but often lie in the disconnect between who we think we should be and who we truly are. I've also developed a friendship with Mr. Henley, who reached out to offer me an unexpected opportunity to collaborate on a community project. Sometimes, paths cross in unexpected ways, and I've come to appreciate the beauty of my winding journey, ready for whatever lies ahead. As I sat in my cozy living room, the soft light of the setting sun casting golden hues across the walls, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I'd come since that pivotal day. The little project Mr. Henley proposed had started as a simple idea, a community mural to bring the neighborhood together, but it blossomed into something far more meaningful. We gathered a lively group of people, each with their unique stories and talents, and before I knew it, the vibrant colors we splashed onto the canvas didn't just represent our individual identities but wove together a tapestry that reflected the spirit of our community. Each stroke of paint was a conversation, a connection, a laugh shared over pizza and cans of soda, with old men telling stories of yesteryear as young children splattered paint with joyful abandon. Those evenings became my sanctuary, a place to recharge away from the stresses of work, and I found myself forming relationships that felt genuine and enduring. As the weeks passed, I noticed Mr. Henley becoming a great friend, offering support and guidance, but also a touch of mystery. He had an ease about him and an otherworldly way of navigating challenges that left me in awe, yet sometimes I caught glimpses of a deeper layer within him, like shadows lingering just beneath a bright surface. One Friday evening, as we took a break to admire the burgeoning mural, I mustered the courage to ask him about himself. The way he paused, looking off into the distance as if weighing his words, left me both intrigued and anxious. Eventually, he shared snippets of his life, starting with his earlier days as a graphic designer to his decision to forsake the corporate grind for passion projects. In the midst of his tale, there was a mention of overcoming personal demons, a fleeting reference that seemed to deepen the shadows in his eyes. Over time, an unspoken bond formed between us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't revealing everything. Perhaps it was my experience from the past, where I'd seen the divide between what people presented and the truths they often hid, but the subtle red flags flickered like weak lights in the back of my mind. There was a day, certain in my conviction, when I stitched together my courage and invited him to share more. He regarded me with a smirk, the kind that held 1,000 secrets, and eventually began to talk about the time he spent in a creative retreat that pieced his life together after an emotional collapse. Part of him had always felt out of place, a wanderer searching for a purpose, yearning for acceptance. But as he allowed me a glimpse into his past, I began to sense weight behind those words, a history not just of passion but of scars that still would flare up uninvited. That night, under a velvety sky spattered with stars, I felt a strange sense of kinship with Mr. Henley. We were both navigating these paths toward healing and authenticity, albeit in different ways. Yet, I couldn't ignore my instincts forever, and the next week I overheard snippets of conversation during our group sessions, words that seemed at odds with the harmonious creation we were cultivating. Some participants whispered about how Mr. Henley had a reputation for getting close to those he saw talent in, only to shift their focus elsewhere, leaving them feeling abandoned. It nagged at me, the thought that everything I cherished about the project was somehow entangled in an imbalance I couldn't yet comprehend. Feeling the pressure bubble inside me, I sought solace in my journal, pouring my thoughts onto the pages as if to unravel the knotted threads of confusion. Were these cautionary tales true? Did my intuition speak of parallel realities, one where we completed this mural together in camaraderie and another where I would find myself tangled in the remnants of trust misplaced? The emotional roller coaster of creating art intertwined with the intrigue surrounding Mr. Henley served as both my safe haven and a source of restlessness. I was in love with this newfound freedom, the ability to express who I truly was, but how could I reconcile that love with the gnawing uncertainty that lingered when I interacted with him? Then came the turning point. During one of our collaborative afternoons, as we painted amidst laughter and music, I noticed Mr. Henley hovering a little too close to one young artist, a girl bursting with potential and eager to impress. The way he offered suggestions, his gaze lingering longer than it should have, stirred something primal within me. I pushed down the tightness in my chest and concentrated on my work, focusing on the colors I was mixing, but it was hard to ignore the growing rumbles of jealousy that pulsed through me. Later that week, I decided it was time to have a straightforward conversation. I invited Mr. Henley to grab coffee after our mural session. My heart pounded as the words piled up in my throat. Sitting across from him in the cafe, the aroma of brewed coffee enveloping us, I looked down into my cup, the steam swirling and curling into the air. Mr. Henley, I began, fighting the tremor in my voice, I want to talk about the project and how we navigate friendships within it. I saw curiosity spark in his eyes, and as I poured out my concerns, I expected some form of acknowledgement, but instead, he leaned back, arms crossed, with that infuriating smirk gracing his lips. "You know," he said, "sometimes it's easy to form connections when we believe the narrative we tell ourselves. But how often do we step back and realize it's just a story we create? Maybe your fears are just remnants of your old job. Let go of those preconceptions and enjoy the ride." His words sliced deeper than I anticipated. As I wrestled with the truth of it, I recognized that he had a point. I was holding tightly to insecurities, a product of a fear-laden past, while he seemed to tread with intention. Yet the shadows returned, turning the warmth of camaraderie into a cold unease. The conversation hung like stale air around us until he reached across the table, his hand atop mine, grounding me. In that moment, I chose to trust my instincts and release the tension gnawing at my gut. Let's realign our focus, I finally suggested, my pulse racing. From now on, let's engage everyone equally. Nobody's story should be sidelined. A flicker of something danced across his eyes, perhaps surprise or contemplation, and he finally smiled, though I sensed the undercurrent of a challenge. All right, he acquiesced, but we'll need to be mindful not to lose the spark. And with that agreement, I felt a renewed sense of hope settle within me, the decision to clear the ambiguous shadows, forging ahead with both clarity and purpose. As the mural neared completion in the weeks that followed, I found a rhythm of joy reverberating through the community, fueled in part by the newfound understanding among us. Mr. Henley and I became partners not just in the art but also in fostering honest conversations, cultivating an environment of trust, and drawing out the best in those around us. There was magic in the unexpected twists of our journey, a reminder that while red flags can signal caution, they can also unlock profound lessons about ourselves and others. As I looked around at the vibrant mural, realizing it represented not only our individual contributions but also the resilience of teamwork and understanding, I understood fully that my path was no longer obscured by shadows. Every winding road had led me here, ready to embrace whatever came next, eager as always to evolve alongside those whom I once perceived as mere acquaintances and who had, through the power of vulnerability and connection, transformed into lifelong friends. As I stood there, taking in the vibrant hues of the mural, the laughter and chatter of my colleagues floated through the air like a gentle breeze, warm and inviting. The colors seemed to dance in harmony with the embodiment of what we'd created together, a testament to our shared struggles and triumphs, each stroke representing a story, a lesson we all carried with us. Not long ago, I had felt adrift, questioning everything about my career and the person I was becoming, and now I found solace in the knowledge that I had surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared. Mr. Henley, with his chronically optimistic disposition and a knack for bringing out the best in everyone, had become a source of inspiration for me. His dedication to the project had opened a window into my own capabilities, encouraging me to explore not just my creative side, but my leadership potential as well. Together we had coordinated workshops that brought the community in to participate, allowing families to paint alongside us, sharing their hopes and dreams in splashes of color. With every paintbrush stroke, I witnessed strangers transform into friends, forging connections that would bridge gaps created by years of indifference. I remember one particular day when a young girl, no older than 8, approached me with wide eyes filled with wonder. "Can I help with your mural?" she asked, her fingers stained with shades of green and blue. I knelt down to meet her gaze, feeling a warmth swell in my chest, and said, "Of course. What do you want to paint?" She thought for a moment and declared, "A huge butterfly. One that can carry all our dreams." I glanced over at Mr. Henley, who was intently focused on the section of the wall behind me, his kind smile betraying the pure joy he felt at witnessing this exchange. That day was a reminder of the unanticipated revelations life can bring, what it means to hope and dream, and I made a point to ensure that the little girl's butterfly was as bold and colorful as her spirit, a new red flag of promise fluttering high amid life's uncertainties. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself not just growing in my new role, but stepping into a version of myself I never thought possible. I shared dinner with colleagues after long days at work, engaging in conversations that stretched far beyond mere small talk. We debated the best pizza toppings, laughed at our rookie mistakes in the early weeks of the project, and even shared our fears about the future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an ethereal glow over the city, I found myself at a small rooftop gathering. With laughter punctuating the crisp air, I felt a growing connection, and somehow, everyone there felt like family. It struck me then, the red flags of my past had been an invitation to reevaluate, and here, I was surrounded by love and support, reaffirming that each twist and turn had sculpted a life that felt richer, more meaningful. But it wasn't just the mural or the friendships that grounded me, it was the conversations I would have with Mr. Henley about vulnerability and authenticity. He would often sit across from me, coffee mug in hand, creating space for deep discussions about our journeys. "You know," he'd say, his eyes twinkling with insights, "it's easy to focus on the flaws of others during interviews, but sometimes we forget to reflect on our own fears and insecurities that block us from seeing their true potential." I found comfort in his words, realizing that while job interviews aim to decipher a person's capabilities, they were equally a challenge for the candidate to embrace their own truth. Those reflections continued to shape my personal narrative, leading me toward resilience and understanding. I was often reminded of a quote I had once dismissed as cliché: "The only way to do great work is to love what you do." Only now did it resonate with wisdom, vibrating with the essence of community, connection, and finding joy amidst uncertainty. The mural, now a collaborative masterpiece, stood proudly as a symbol of that journey, telling of creativity birthed in friendship and the magic that emerges when we choose to let down our walls. As I indulged in that realization, I knew that the next chapter of my life was open for exploration. My mind wandered to the next community project Mr. Henley and I had been brainstorming, an arts festival that would showcase not only shared artistic expressions but also foster mentorship in the local youth. I could hardly wait. The thrill of possibility rushed through me, invigorating my spirit with hope and excitement for what lay ahead. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly aligned with my purpose, fully aware that every winding road had led me here, to this moment of connection, creativity, and clarity. Looking toward the future, I welcomed the unexpected, accepting that sometimes the most beautiful journeys unravel from the red flags we choose to face with courage and grace. The day had started like any other, with the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft tapping of keyboards providing a familiar soundtrack to our small IT office. I had settled into my routine, seated in front of my dual monitors, running through the usual set of tasks, system updates, routine checks, and the occasional support ticket from distressed coworkers. The office was quiet, almost soothing, with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air, but that peace shattered the moment I saw him walk through the door. It was Phil, our CEO's longtime friend, a man whose connection to the top rung of the corporate ladder made us all uneasy. He strode in without so much as a hello, an aura of entitlement surrounding him like a cloud. His casual demeanor clashed with the sternness of his pronouncement. He demanded full access to our systems. A knot of dread formed in my stomach at his request, not just because it felt inherently wrong, but because I had witnessed the fallout of giving access to those who didn't understand the responsibility that came with it. I exchanged glances with my coworker, Sarah, whose eyes mirrored my concern. We both knew that security protocols were put in place for a reason. Phil, I managed, trying my best to maintain a calm exterior, I'm afraid we can't grant the kind of access without proper clearance and justification. He scoffed, running a hand through his tousled hair, dismissing my hesitance with a wave like I was a mere inconvenience in his day. Come on, you're not seriously going to make this harder, are you? It's just a little access, you should lighten up. I could feel my palms grow clammy at his words, that creeping mix of anxiety and moral indignation swirling inside me. I was caught in the turmoil of knowing that defying him could have consequences, not just for my career, but for the integrity of our systems. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, striving to steady my racing heart. Phil, there are rules for a reason. If you need access, there's a process to follow. The tension in the room thickened, and I could sense Sarah urging me with wide eyes to let it go, to just bow to the request so we could pass this awkward moment. But I couldn't shake the foreboding feeling that allowing this was opening a door to something far darker than mere technicalities. He folded his arms, his expression hardening, but I stood my ground, my voice unwavering as I reiterated the importance of safeguarding our data. Days passed, and I thought that perhaps it had blown over, until I received a cryptic email late one evening. It was from an unfamiliar account but bore his name as the subject line. Confusion set in as I opened it to find a list of usernames and passwords, seemingly random data points, and a note that read, "I'm relying on you to fulfill our deal. Access your systems and provide me what I need. You know where to find me." Cold panic washed over me. What had I stumbled into? Was it just a ploy to cover something up, or was it truly innocent? I felt trapped between my desire to be loyal to my employer and protect our work while also wanting to shield myself from consequences I could hardly predict. In the end, I made a decision that I feared I would always look back on. I reached out to my manager, who was out of office at the time, but I felt the weight of my choice grow heavier with each hour until he replied with a firm no. We were headed into a meeting to discuss security protocols the very next day, and I shared everything with him. Shock flickered across his face as he scrolled through the email. "We're shutting this down immediately," he said decisively, leaving me halfway relieved and halfway terrified. Phil was furious when he learned of my decision, of our refusal to comply, and summoned for a confrontation. It felt like a weight had been lifted as I faced him, the cloud of guilt dissipating, replaced by the solidarity of my coworkers and management standing behind me. He raged and fumed, trying to appeal to our sense of loyalty, our ambitions, but we held firm, knowing that allowing this would compromise everything we had worked for. "I trusted you," he spat at me, and the words cut like a knife, but I took solace in the fact that I could move forward knowing I did the right thing. The next week saw Phil removed from his associations with the company, a casualty of his own hubris. The office felt lighter without him, but I remained cautious, scanning every email and request for any lingering signs of potential fallout. Looking back, I realize it was a turning point, a moment that reshaped my understanding of trust and integrity in the workplace. As for an update? Well, here's where it gets even stranger. I found out later that Phil was mixed up in something far deeper than I realized, something involving data breaches and concerns that had the higher-ups scrambling to secure our network even tighter than before. So in that sense, I guess I did save the day. But who knows? I'm still grappling with the reality that sometimes in the pursuit of loyalty, one needs to question everything, even friends of the most powerful, and I can't shake the feeling that I might have dodged a bullet that day. As I sat at my desk, the soft hum of the office around me felt comforting yet ominous in light of what transpired. It had been a week since that fateful day when Phil, my CEO's friend, had stormed in, arrogance percolating from every pore as he demanded unrestricted access to our systems. I had handled the situation with a calmness I hardly believed I was capable of, but the aftermath hummed like a low-frequency alarm in the back of my mind. Each day I returned to the office felt like a tightrope walk, balancing my job security against the nagging thought of Phil's motives. I remember sitting with my colleague, Sarah, over lunch, the two of us trading stories while the taste of lukewarm coffee swirled around my cup. I looked up at her, seeking solace in familiarity, and asked, "Do you think it's really just about Phil wanting to check in on his buddy's company?" Her brow furrowed, and she bit into her sandwich as if stalling for time. "I don't know, Mike. It sounds like he wanted something much bigger than access. You have to trust your instincts." She flashed a conspiratorial smile, but her voice held a weight that lingered in the nuances of our conversation. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, struggling to shake the sense of impending dread that clung to me like a shadow. The digital landscape I had navigated through my career, once a realm of puzzles and systems, now felt starkly dangerous, like a labyrinth with no exit. My mind raced back to the way Phil had leaned over my shoulder, his eyes wide with a disturbing kind of gleeful curiosity as I hesitated. It wasn't just a request, it was a command cloaked in charm, and that realization gnawed at me. Was I right to refuse him? I spent hours reanalyzing the CEO's likely discomfort with such a blatant breach. Was my loyalty to my company, and my moral judgment, sufficient to stave off whatever dark currents Phil harbored? The days turned into a montage of anxiety, each muted conversation in the office paired with potential repercussions of my actions. I saw Phil's face invade my thoughts during quiet moments, blurred in the background like a face of a clock I desperately wished to reset. As the following weeks unfolded, I noticed strange patterns, missed calls from various officials trying to reach Phil, the abrupt tightening of our security protocols, and whispers through the grapevine about a mysterious investor pulling out of a significant project. My heart sank when I came across a hacker forum late one evening, images floating by of exposed data breaches that unnervingly mirrored our own systems. Each headline carried the weight of the unknown, and somewhere beneath that certainty, I began to understand that I had unknowingly become part of a larger story riddled with deception and betrayal. Maybe I had been granted a moment of clarity when I denied Phil access, or perhaps, I had just plunged myself into deeper waters. I could have been swimming alongside a potential monster. Instead, I had steered clear. Every so often, I would glance towards the conference room where Phil's presence lingered in phantom echoes, wondering if we'd see him again, and if so, which version would be through the door, the charming friend or the potential threat. As days melted into weeks, I felt a weight lift ever so slightly, as if I had donned iron armor instead of the corporate cloak I'd worn every day. One afternoon, while I stopped by reception, fate, the universe, or maybe just bad coffee, conspired against me. As I turned toward the entrance, an unfamiliar tension bridged the air, causing me to freeze when a figure emerged from the elevator. It was Phil, flanked by two men in sharply tailored suits, all too aware of the eyes glued to them. Instinctively, I stepped back into the shadows, my breath caught in my throat. My heart raced as I caught snippets of their conversation, sharp whispers slicing through the air like glass. My mind raced, the part of me that believed I was watching something unfold mixed with the part that wanted to flee. I leaned closer, carefully inching to eavesdrop, desperate to piece together this puzzle I thought had already revealed its face. "We need the access. The board is getting jittery," one of the men remarked, his tone devoid of warmth. "Your friend's been making waves I'd rather avoid." "We'll get what we need, just not through that particular door," Phil laughed, but it lacked any richness. "Those techies live in fear, just mention my name, and they'll scramble to please. A swell of realization hit me. Phil wasn't just a charming friend, he was a manipulator. The encounter pulled back the velvet curtain I had hesitated long to unravel. As they turned to leave, I was struck by a vicious wave of adrenaline. Suddenly, I understood my responsibility. It wasn't just about protecting our data, it was about safeguarding us all from the potential peril Phil represented. That evening, shaken yet resolute, I walked straight into my manager's office, recounting every detail I had overheard. Their eyes widened, and in that moment, I felt the weight of trust settle onto my shoulders with an enormity I couldn't ignore. The investigation that followed soon revealed layers to Phil's involvement that I had meticulously unearthed, and soon enough, the air at the office shifted from unease to renewed vigor as my colleagues rallied together. I learned that sometimes the bonds formed in the corporate world aren't as straightforward as they seem, and loyalty becomes a dual-edged sword, cutting through the mist of what was mere friendship to a murky underbelly of ambition and unresolved karma. The road to recovery for our company was lengthy, marked by security audits and sleepless nights, but as months passed, I felt gratitude seep through, a reminder that by trusting my instincts, I had steered clear of a treacherous undercurrent. So, here we are, standing at the precipice of newfound awareness, and while the heaviness of Phil's actions lingers behind us, I step forward unburdened, each day a chance to rebuild, reflect, and reclaim a piece of the innocence that once defined my work. And yes, in this odd journey of corporate twists and questionable loyalties, I've learned that sometimes, a single moment's hesitation can be the difference between chaos and clarity. The journey ahead seemed uncertain, yet I found solace in the routine, a comfort in the familiar. I remapped my landscape at work, investing my energy into projects that restored trust, not just with my team, but within myself. Each morning, I arrived at the office with a renewed purpose, greeting colleagues with genuine smiles and open conversations, hoping to cultivate an environment where honesty outshone the shadows of betrayal. Little things began to change. The light banter over coffee breaks turned into brainstorming sessions about cybersecurity measures, bridging gaps that had formed in our wake of suspicion. I knew this wasn't just about protecting our systems anymore, it was about building a fortification of camaraderie, one fortified with shared knowledge rather than whispered fears. Phil's absence echoed through the dimly lit halls of the office. I would catch the occasional mention of him in hushed voices or see glances exchanged over lunch, but it was as if he had become a ghost, haunting yet intangible. My gut had screamed at me during his visit, a dire warning that felt far too instinctual to ignore. I could now reflect with clarity, grateful that I had stood my ground. Yet, memories of our once harmless exchanges lingered, the laughter and camaraderie we shared, creating an unsettling juxtaposition against the malicious actions I had uncovered. And sometimes, late at night, when the hum of my computer quieted down and the office had long emptied, doubts would creep in, taunting me with what-ifs. What if I'd been wrong? What if my immediate judgment had cost Phil a chance to redeem himself? But with each passing week, the dread eased, and a surprising friendship blossomed with Jess, our new cybersecurity analyst. She brought in an air of enthusiasm that was infectious, balancing my dark musings with her lighthearted wit. One evening, while working late to refine a presentation for our next team meeting, we found ourselves wrapped in conversation about resilience and trust. The way she recounted stories of corporate misdeeds, her voice laced with a mix of humor and frustration, reminded me that I wasn't alone in navigating this gauntlet. People can be unpredictable, she said, her fingers tapping away, bringing up statistics on another data breach attempt that had emerged that very week. But the beauty of it is learning to adapt. You learn to protect yourself, navigate those waters. Her words resonated with me, and I couldn't help but smile, appreciating how innate her perspective seemed, refreshing amidst the turmoil I had faced. Time flowed, and the routine of our work settled in, punctuated by updates on network security measures and a few unnecessary corporate meetings that felt like a labyrinth with no end. Gradually, I discovered that Phil had been discreetly sending out feelers, trying to return to good graces with the company and some of my coworkers through casual lunches and goodwill gestures. My emotions pulled in ridiculous directions. On one side was the anger for what he'd done, the way he had endangered something we had built together. On the other side, an odd sympathy for someone who felt like a friend and an ally until the truth tumbled down like a shattered mirror. And then came the day when my assumptions would be challenged yet again. I stepped out for an uneventful lunch, but fate decided to intervene. I just raised my fork, ready for a small battle with a sandwich, when I spotted him across the street. Phil, in a well-tailored suit but with an air of dishevelment that suggested he had not been sleeping well, appeared more gaunt than I remembered. I hesitated, my heartbeat quickening, not out of anger, but turmoil. I could feel the remnants of compassion creeping in, battling against the memories of treachery. Should I approach? Or was it simply too far gone? The tides of time ebbed and flowed around me as I wrestled with my feelings, caught in a storm of potential confrontation. Ultimately, curiosity overpowered my trepidation. I set my sandwich down, took a deep breath, and crossed the street, finding myself standing in front of him, heart pounding in my chest. The fleeting expression on his face flickered between surprise and vulnerability, and for a moment, the bitterness of the past was suspended in the charged atmosphere around us. "Hey," I forced out, a word loaded with years of complexity, "can we talk?" His eyes widened, and as he nodded, I silently realized that perhaps this moment, this conversation, could be a bridge to healing for both of us, or at the very least, a way to let go of some lingering weight. We stood there, two figures at the crossroads of our making, ready to engage in a dialogue that might just reshape our understanding of trust and the shadows that lurked in corporate corridors. Whether it would lead to one step forward or a spiral into chaos, only time would tell, but as I looked into his eyes, I felt ready to face whatever he would throw my way, hoping it would come with clarity, for both our sakes. I never thought a simple question about showering could unravel so much about my life, but here we are. It all started the day my roommate, Jake, casually asked in our group chat if everyone preferred to shower in the morning or at night, and I replied with a nonchalant, "At night, obviously. Who wants to start their day all wet and uncomfortable?" Little did I know that my humorous quip would ignite a minor controversy, leading to a rift between us and uncovering deeper, more personal conflicts within myself. You see, Jake and I had shared a small apartment for about a year now after college, thrown together by the randomness of online roommate listings. He was easygoing, while I tended to be more of an introvert, preferring the solace of late-night gaming marathons to the noisy bustling of parties. That night, I could almost see the flicker of indignation from him through my phone screen as he fired back about how refreshing and invigorating a morning shower could be, creating an almost evangelical fervor in the chat. As playful banter turned into a back and forth that had others joining the thread like old schoolmates reunited, I found my dissatisfaction with the discussion pooling into something darker. Wasn't this just a harmless debate? Yet, the more we discussed it, the more I felt my own insecurities bubble up. After all, my nighttime showers were more than a choice of cleanliness, they became my sanctuary, my shield against the day that had just passed. They were prayers whispered in the steam, reflections shared with the dull hum of water against porcelain. Realization hit me, it wasn't the water itself but the comfort I found in solitude that I protected fiercely. Days passed, and that small spark of humor in a Facebook thread morphed into silent tension. I could sense Jake's frustration swirling about like a summer storm he kept bottled up, and soon it spilled over into our daily interactions. He started to leave for work earlier, making it apparent that my nighttime routine was becoming an inconvenience, and I felt that old familiar sting of guilt prick my conscience. The idea of me being selfish over something so trivial gnawed at my mind, and I wondered if I was wrong to cling so tightly to my rituals. One evening, after another long day of indecision and hours spent analyzing what seemed like a ghost of a conversation, I broke down, standing in the bathroom, water cascading down my back, the temperature just hot enough to sting, barely feeling its familiar embrace as I wrestled with my feelings. My phone buzzed on the counter, a message from Jake read, "Let's talk." Unease settled in my stomach as I switched off the shower, suddenly conscious of the silence surrounding me. The conversation we desperately needed felt like a freight train barreling toward us, ready to collide. Sitting across from him at the kitchen table later that night felt like stepping onto a tightrope. I stared into his furrowed brows, willing myself to speak. First, fearing the conflict would only wash over us again if I didn't clear the air. Before either of us could speak, he let out a short laugh tinged with frustration and said, "I apologize. I didn't mean to make it feel like there was a right or wrong way to shower." His words hung in the air, and it felt like a release. I hadn't expected to find comfort and laughter amid a dispute, but it worked, and soon we were able to share perspectives, me recounting my childhood memories of feeling lost in an overwhelming world, where my safe haven lay in those evening rituals. He talked about his love for dawn and how it energized his spirit, and for the first time since this began, we listened rather than debated. As the conversation shifted from a simple showering preference to something beautifully profound, we learned about one another in ways that surprised us both. The interaction ended with a gentle understanding, no solutions, just acceptance. We agreed to let our different routines coexist. I would respect his morning preference while finding space to shower at night, and surprisingly enough, I felt lighter. The emotional shadows that had clawed at me lifted, showing that our differences weren't barriers but rather opportunities for compassion and growth. Reflecting on those moments now, I realize how much we often overlook the power of small things, how the simplest questions can lead to deeper understanding and connection over something as mundane as a shower schedule. It's an ongoing balance we're learning to strike in our shared lives, reminding me that personal rituals, no matter how small, are just as vital as the space we foster with others. As I wash away the day each night, I can still feel that fresh hope for what lies ahead, and in the morning sun, I can always sense a little invigorating joy. Life has a peculiar way of exposing what we truly need and teaching us that sometimes, even in the trivialities, we find our most profound truths. Update: it's been several months since that incident, and I wanted to share how our relationship has transformed. We've navigated our differences thoughtfully, discussing everything from chores to routines without resentment. Even negotiating bathroom time has turned into a communal ritual where we leave uplifting notes for one another. So if you're wondering whether there's a right way to shower, the answer is simply, whatever keeps you grounded. It was a crisp autumn evening when I realized just how much our little ritual had changed the dynamic in our home. The sunlight had surrendered to an early dusk, casting a soft golden hue through our living room windows. I reclined on our well-loved couch, a spot where countless discussions had unfolded, and listened to the rustling of leaves outside, a gentle reminder of the world continuing its cycle. My thoughts drifted to Alex, sitting at the kitchen table, pencil poised over a new notepad filled with doodles and half-formed ideas. He had taken up writing recently, spurred by our shared commitment to appreciating the small joys in life. There was something deeply comforting in watching him, a mundane moment that felt almost sacred in its simplicity. Just last week, we had joked about me showering in the morning while he preferred the nighttime cleanse, yet today, the topic felt a bit richer, a bit deeper. I smiled at how we'd turned something as trivial as shower preferences into an exploration of our personalities, how I thrived in morning routines, using that time to gather energy for the day ahead, while he found solace in the water's warmth as he washed away the weight of the world. It was a playful battle that had transformed into a comforting acknowledgement of our differences. Each note we left for the other became a reminder that it was perfectly okay to clash in some areas, as long as we supported one another through it. My heart swelled with gratitude as I recalled those late-night discussions after I'd come from my morning shower, the way he would tease me about my overly cheerful attitude, but ultimately end up smiling at my boundless enthusiasm. Suddenly, the kettle whistled, and Alex poured himself a cup of tea, a daily ritual that we both cherished, paired perfectly with those brief moments of connection. As he walked over and handed me a warm mug, our fingers brushed together, sending a flash of warmth up my arm that transcended the chill in the air. I couldn't help but marvel at how simple acts of care had bridged the gap that once felt insurmountable, a soothing balm for old grievances. "Hey," I said softly, "do you remember that week when we almost moved out separate ways because of shower timing?" The question hung in the air, and I watched as he chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. "Yeah, how ridiculous was that? All over a shower." His laughter was contagious, and soon we were both grinning at how we had almost let something so trivial unravel the fabric of our relationship. It felt reassuring to know that our love had grown stronger rather than strained, forged in discussion and subtle compromises, reminding us that we are imperfect creatures working together to create a harmonious existence. Doing the dishes next to one another had become a place of laughter and shared stories instead of a dreaded chore. Morning chores transformed into affectionate exchanges where we shared dreams and ambitions. As we sat there, sipping our tea and allowing the warmth to seep into our bones, I thought back to our first months together when I had been so rigid in my routines and he, in his. Life had a funny way of teaching, didn't it? We had grown, molded by our conversations and the light-hearted notes exchanged in the bathroom, a playful nudge toward understanding. Now, our mornings began with warmth, not just in water but in attitude, as we greeted each new day as friends and partners, no longer battling for control over a single moment of quiet. Sometimes, before climbing into bed, we'd take a moment to acknowledge those notes through whispers in the dark, a quiet acknowledgement of how far we had shifted from our old stances. I marveled at how our relationship was no longer simply about shower timing but about meeting one another in all our complexities, learning to dance through the friction. And as the moonlight filtered through the curtains of our cozy home, I realized that we'd not only learned about how to shower together, but also how to love without reservations, how to embrace our idiosyncrasies and transform them into stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks. In the end, I imagined any asking about the right way to shower would yield a simple truth. It wasn't about the timing or the order of events, it was about merging routines with the love that bathed them in understanding. And maybe that mattered more than a perfectly scalding shower or the ideal evening ritual. What mattered was how we chose to show up for one another, day after day. As I placed the empty teacup down, our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw our future stretching out before us, a tapestry woven from the threads of shared quirks, affection, and understanding. The world beyond our little home could keep spinning chaotically, but together, we had found a tranquil center, our shower of love above all else. As I sank back into the soft embrace of the couch, just beneath the warm light of our modest living room, I couldn't help but smile at how far we'd come since that initial shower debate. Kevin and I had always been an odd couple. He was the nocturnal artist, paint-splattered and lost in dreams of faraway worlds, while I preferred the precision and calm of daylight, my mind firing off plans like a pinball machine. But that stark difference, as irksome as it had once seemed, became our greatest strength. Together, we had cultivated a delicate dance of compromise and love that seeped into every facet of our daily lives. We had showered each other's worries away over countless mornings and evenings, sharing masks made from avocados and honey, turning what could have been mundane into a cherished tradition. It's strange to think that something as simple as agreeing on shower times could lead us here, sipping chamomile tea on a lazy Saturday, enjoying the comfortable silence that only partners can share. And yet, it was during one of those particularly rainy weekends, when the world outside was blanketed in gray, that a challenge nudged at our peaceful existence. It all began when we decided to tidy up the clutter that had accumulated in our tiny apartment, a process filled with nostalgia as we sifted through memories, old photographs, forgotten receipts, and trinkets swapped during travels long past. It was cathartic, yet strangely revealing. In a forgotten shoebox, I uncovered a letter from my grandmother, a woman whose wisdom often lingered in my heart and shaped my decisions. She had always extolled the virtues of patience, urging me to embrace both the mundane and the extraordinary. Tucked within the letter was a small envelope containing a photograph of her, young and radiant, showering under a rain-soaked sun, an expression of pure bliss etched on her face. Feeling nostalgic, I shared the photo with Kevin, leaning into the warm light of our dining table, where we had discovered so many of life's little treasures together. His eyes danced with curiosity as he absorbed the innocence of my grandmother's joy. "You know," he said, picking up a crumpled photo we had taken during a spontaneous road trip last summer, "this reminds me of that time we ended up at that little diner, the one with the bad coffee and the amazing pie." His words somehow ignited something in me, a realization that perhaps our cherished routines weren't just about the tasks we performed but the space we carved out for each other's memories. Over the next few days, as we dug deeper into the heart of our belongings, I began to notice something that made my stomach twist in knots. The more we unearthed, the more I felt the edges of Kevin's world encroaching upon my own, his sketchbooks piled high, unfinished canvases leaning against walls like silent witnesses. It was beautiful, this mountain of his creativity. It was also chaotic. The blending of our lives had created a beautiful mess, and yet I was surprised to find that I wanted more clarity, an oasis of order in the thrumming current of our differing habits. I hesitated, unsure if voicing this desire would unearth resentment or frustration from Kevin. At the same time, I feared that even questioning our newfound tranquility would send ripples across our carefully crafted relationship. How could I express this without sounding ungrateful? One evening, as the faint light of day slipped outside the window, I summoned the courage to broach the subject. "Hey, love, can we talk about our space?" I began softly, watching his hands pause mid-sketch. His expression hardened slightly, a flicker of defensiveness crossing his features, and I had a second of panic, my heart racing with the fear of undoing everything good we had built. But there was kindness in his voice when he responded, "Yeah, I think that's important." We both took a moment to breathe, tapping into the patience my grandmother had once preached. The conversation unfolded like a delicate flower, careful petals yielding to disclose deeper thoughts. We discussed how each of us viewed our personal space, the orderly retreat I sought and the creative chaos that Kevin thrived in. By the time we wrapped things up, the remnants of doubt had transformed into an understanding that felt like healing. We spent the following Saturdays rearranging our home, consciously carving out pockets of solitude amid his expansive imagination. He set up an art corner that faced the balcony, allowing sunlight to pour over his sketches while isolating them from the clutter I had wrested away with tenderness. I soon realized each little corner brought an essence of both our worlds to life. My tidy nook filled with books and plants reflected calm, while his vibrant canvas, peppered with splashes of color, became an almost sacred space of inspiration. Life, with all its routine showers and soft moments of understanding, began to shift yet again, reflecting the beauty of our harmonious union. What I had feared may disrupt us transformed into the roots of genuine growth, watering both our styles without overshadowing either. With the rain tapping rhythmically against the window, I sat beside him, watching the world drip outside, a world that still spun chaotically. We were now crafting something deeper, balance and love, proof that asking for what you need doesn't mean you're breaking, but rather evolving. Each brushstroke he painted felt like our journey, and I couldn't help but see the future extending before us, full of color and light. Months down the road, as another rainy Saturday unfurled before us, I glanced over at Kevin, who was engrossed in his latest masterpiece, colors dancing across the canvas with the same vibrancy of our intertwined lives. I turned my gaze back to my own quiet space, the edges softened beneath the glow of a reading lamp, and felt a profound gratitude filling the air around us. We had showered each other with the understanding of our differences, and it made the world outside worthwhile. So, if you find yourself struggling to merge lives and routines, remember that it's in the honoring of those differences that the richest layers of love often reveal themselves. Confession: I am a man of highly low intelligence, and there's a very slim chance that will ever change. That might sound like a harsh self-assessment, but when I look back on my life, it feels oddly true. From early on, I always struggled in school. While others grasped concepts with relative ease, I often found myself lost in a sea of confusion. It was a source of contention at home, primarily with my father, who'd often shake his head in frustration, muttering that I was a genuine disappointment. I grew up in the shadow of my brilliant sister, who always had top grades, a perfect college resume, and a charisma that seemed to attract everyone she met. When I graduated high school with a barely passing GPA, I decided to take a different path, one where I wouldn't have to compete against her brilliance. I started working at a local hardware store, surrounded by tools and paint cans, where I felt more at home than I ever did with textbooks. My coworkers accepted me for who I was, and I quickly learned the ins and outs of everything from different types of screws to the best ways to mix paint, the kind of knowledge that didn't really require sharp intellectual aptitude, just a willingness to listen and a decent memory. One fateful evening, as I was restocking shelves alone, I met her, Maria. She was an artist, doing some kind of community project that involved painting fences around town, and she wandered into our store for paint. She had a radiant energy, and as I helped her choose the right colors, her laughter warmed my insides in a way I'd never felt before. We struck up a conversation, and in that moment, surrounded by paint and hardware, I felt a spark of connection that made me forget all about my academic shortcomings. She didn't care that I was terrible at math or that I couldn't remember the capital of Kazakhstan. We talked about art, creativity, and our mutual love for nature. After that, she kept coming back to the store, and we'd share smiles that turned into inside jokes, and eventually, into something deeper. But there was a lingering fear in my heart. As things developed, I began to doubt myself and my worthiness. Maria had been to art schools and galleries, her mind was a treasure chest of culture and ideas, while I was just a guy who knew his way around a lawnmower. One night, I found myself at her place, where we were painting together under soft lighting, and she asked me about my dreams and aspirations. I froze, the question gnashing at a vulnerability I had buried deep. Could I express my dreams when they felt so mundane? I stammered out something about hoping to one day open my own hardware store, a quaint dream, perhaps, but it felt embarrassing next to her ambitions of having a gallery show. She sensed my hesitation and, rather than scoffing or diminishing my dream as I had feared, she smiled and said, "That's an incredible dream. You know you can do it, right?" Her words, rather than uplift me, lodged a sense of dread in my gut. What if she was investing time in a lost cause? As our relationship deepened, so did my anxiety. Each time I left her, I replayed our conversations, fixating on moments where I felt inadequate. I let my imaginations run wild, picturing her telling her friends about her simple boyfriend, a man who barely scraped by. One night, during a particularly vulnerable moment, I confessed my fears to her. I told her that I felt like we lived in two different worlds, one where she was a creative genius, and me, a man struggling to keep up. I braced myself for rejection, the feared look of pity or disappointment that had marked so many of my formative years. Instead, she took my hands and said, "You are more than enough for me. It's not about where we come from or where we're going, it's about the journey we build together." And for the first time, my heart felt a semblance of peace. Months passed, and I threw myself into the things I loved, working at the store, painting with Maria, and learning to embrace my creativity alongside hers. One warm afternoon, she proposed a project for the local art fair, encouraging me to join her in creating something that exhibited both of our talents. The thought terrified me, What if my lack of intelligence shone through in our joint peace? But somehow, I found a glimmer of hope in her vision. Together, we crafted a piece that merged practical elements with artistic flair, making a whimsical garden sculpture from discarded tools. The day of the fair arrived, and standing beside her, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not just in our creation but in who I was becoming. People stopped by, impressed with our work, and I realized that maybe, just maybe, intelligence could manifest in forms other than academia. I wasn't just restocking shelves and answering questions, I was creating something meaningful in a world that often dismissed me. As the sun began to set, the fair bustling around us, I took a breath, letting in the fading light that symbolized hope. Maria turned to me, her eyes sparkling, and said, "I knew you had it in you." Today, as I recount this journey, I find myself reflecting not on my seemingly low intelligence, but on my ability to learn and grow in different ways. I might never be a scholar or the wizard of numbers, but I've found a treasure in self-acceptance, an understanding that everyone's mind works differently, and that worth isn't solely defined by traditional intellect. I hope that my experience might resonate with someone else feeling inadequate or overlooked, and that they too might discover their own unique path to fulfillment. And while Maria and I continue our journey, I still think back to the nights spent under a roof of stars, learning to paint both canvases and dreams, trusting that love and creativity truly know no bounds. Update: a few weeks after the fair, we received an unexpected call. The local art gallery wanted to display our sculpture in their local artist showcase. They called it a captivating depiction of ingenuity and asked if we'd both be willing to speak about our collaboration at the event. It seems the journey never really ends. Instead, it twists and turns, much like my own thoughts on who I am, a simple man, perhaps, but one who is continuously evolving. As I sat there, staring at the phone in disbelief after that unexpected call from the gallery, I couldn't shake the paradox of my life. How, in my own mind, which often felt muddled and simple, could we have created something that not only captured attention but also reflected our unfolding relationship? The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind, filled with a mixture of nervous anticipation and excitement that colored every moment. I helped Elena put the final touches on our sculpture, a woven collage of discarded materials that was both a physical manifestation of our efforts and a metaphor for our lives, imperfect, but undeniably beautiful. We spent long evenings in her studio, talking about everything and nothing, the quiet hum of the city outside our window punctuating our laughter. As the night of the gallery opening arrived, I nearly choked on my words upon addressing the audience. Standing there in a room filled with bright, brilliantly trained minds and eager art enthusiasts, I felt like an imposter draped in a second-hand suit, my own intelligence seeming to wane with each chuckle or knowing nod from the crowd. But as I spoke about our sculpture and how art had threaded its way into our romance, something shifted within me. I found my voice, steady and clear, illuminating our journey and the symbiotic nature of love and creativity. It was not an act of eloquence but of genuine feeling that transformed my simple words into something meaningful. While some murmured about our unique perspective and unorthodox methodologies, I recognized that what emerged from my mouth was more than just a presentation. It was a reflection of my journey as a man who often felt at odds with a world that valued intellect over passion. Each shared glance with Elena filled me with comfort, a silent reminder that love was smudged with imperfections, and sometimes, especially for someone like me, that was more than enough. There was a camaraderie among us, forged in late-night brainstorming sessions and quiet moments of shared solitude, and as patrons congratulated us after our presentation and poured admiration towards our work, I realized that perhaps being a man of highly low intelligence wasn't solely a deficiency. It was an invitation to explore life through a different lens, one that seemed to appreciate the beauty in the flawed and the fragmented. I even glimpsed admiration in the eyes of the gallery owner as she approached us, speaking with a warmth that enveloped me, acknowledging how our art encapsulated a kind of truth that resonated with many. As I stood there, basking in the glow of unexpected success, I felt the weight of my insecurities begin to lift like fog before a sunrise. While I knew I might not ever be a philosopher or a scientist, I understood that my strength lay not in knowing the intricacies of life but in feeling them deeply. Weeks turned into months, and the gallery opening became a backdrop, a moment in time when the stars aligned just right, illuminating the possibilities that lay ahead. Through it all, Elena and I grew, coupled in this tender evolution, and I found myself modifying my own internal narrative about intelligence. It was symbolic, a feeling of progression rather than a measurable standard. The world outside continued spinning, with its judgments and expectations, but within the cocoon of our connection, we painted new stories on hidden canvases in the quiet of our studio, learning that our experiences together shape not just our art but our hearts. We even joked about starting an art collective for those of us who felt like outsiders, art for the amateurs, we called it, where creativity mattered more than critique, and anyone with a story to tell could join us, because in the end, who I was and who I became were merely threads in a beautifully chaotic tapestry unraveling before me. As I settled into bed that night, my heart full, I wondered where our newfound journey would take us next, the anticipation warming me like a gentle spring breeze carrying whispers of future possibilities. In the silence that enveloped the room, I made a wish, not for recognition or accolades, but for the strength to embrace my own uniqueness and to keep weaving dreams into reality, just as we had begun to do together. Days turned into weeks, and each morning dawned with a palpable excitement that sparkled in the air like sunlight dancing on the surface of water. As the date of the art gallery showcase approached, Amelia and I poured our hearts into preparing for the event, infusing our conversations with laughter and anticipation. I found myself spending hours in our little studio, the faint scent of paint and clay swirling around me, as our collaboration transformed not just our artwork but also our understanding of each other. We adapted our sculptural piece, adding small details inspired by late-night talks beneath the stars, tiny figures entwined in moments of joy and heartbreak, capturing fragments of stories we shared over warm cups of tea. As I molded the clay, I thought about how far I had come from the days when my thoughts felt heavy and clumsy. This project, this relationship, had made me realize that intelligence wasn't measured solely by the complexities of one's thoughts but also by the capacity for love, resilience, and the willingness to grow. When the night of the exhibit finally arrived, I donned my best shirt, a simple blue that made my eyes sparkle, while Amelia was a vision in a flowy dress that swirled around her like waves. As we entered the gallery, its walls alive with paintings and sculptures, I felt like a child walking into a world of endless possibilities. People mingled, their whispers and laughter creating a symphony that filled the expansive space. Our sculpture stood proudly at the center of the room, a blend of textures and colors showcasing our journey, a physical manifestation of uncertainty and companionship woven into every inch. I took a deep breath, the excitement mingling with a hint of nervousness, as I spotted the event curator making her way toward us. She smiled warmly, her eyes glinting with enthusiasm, and introduced herself as Camille. "The energy you both have together is inspiring," she said. "Your work embodies something deeply human." In that moment, my heart fluttered. Here was acknowledgement, not just of our art, but of the bond we nurtured along the way. As the night wore on, we spoke to visitors, sharing the story behind our sculpture, delving into the emotions, the fears, and the hopes we infused into our creation. I spoke honestly about my journey, about how I had once felt trapped in my own limitations, and how art had become my way of inviting others into my world. To my surprise, many of them didn't just see our sculpture, they resonated with my words, sharing their own struggles and triumphs in return. It felt like building a bridge between hearts, a candid exchange of dreams, fostering connections that evening. As the event began to wind down, the gallery owner announced the highlight of the night, the winner of the Local Artist Showcase Award. My stomach fluttered nervously, I hadn't even considered winning. When our names were called as the recipients, I was momentarily rooted to the spot, disbelief washing over me like a gentle tide. Amelia clasped my hand tightly, her joy infectious, and the applause that erupted around us felt like a warm embrace. When we stepped up to accept our plaque, a beautifully crafted piece of wood engraved with our names, I felt an unfamiliar warmth bloom in my chest. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts, and I spoke from my heart. This isn't just our accomplishment, it reflects the journey we dared to share. I am grateful for my partner in crime, whose love and creativity inspired every moment of this. The audience nodded, many smiling knowingly, as if they could see the truth in my words. Later that night, as we left the gallery hand in hand, the cool breeze danced around us, and the faint sounds of laughter echoed behind. Amelia turned to me, her cheeks flushed with happiness, and said, "We did this together." I admired her, feeling a rush of gratitude for her unwavering support and our shared dreams. It was a reminder of the simple truth that had guided me through this journey, that sometimes, the greatest triumphs come not from grand notions of intelligence, but from the beauty of vulnerability and connection. As we climbed into bed later that night, I whispered a silent vow to cherish this growth, to face each new day not with the weight of expectations, but with the unwavering courage to reveal my true self, the simple man striving to weave dreams into reality. The next chapter awaited, and I knew that no matter where it led, I would embrace it with an open heart, ready for whatever surprise awaited in the tapestry of life. It's funny how a single moment can change everything, especially when you've poured your heart and soul into something that ultimately feels like a grand betrayal. I've been a dedicated fan of the show Through the Veil since its first season, drawn in by the intricate world building and the intricate relationships between characters. Each week, I'd gather with my small circle of friends, popcorn in hand, eagerly speculating about plot twists and character arcs. The show was more than just a pastime for us, it was a tapestry where our own experiences wove into the complex narratives playing out on our screens. But then came the final season, a season that was supposed to tie up years of storytelling in a satisfying bow. Instead, it felt like the showrunners had taken a megaphone to our cherished theories and shouted, "We don't care." I still remember the day the finale aired, a mix of excitement and dread swelling in my chest. As the hours approached, I could feel the electricity running through our group chat, with everyone sharing their thoughts, their hopes for the characters they had come to love as much as old friends. However, as the credits rolled on what was supposed to be our grand finale, I sat in stunned silence, my friends too, eyes wide. The plot had twisted in the most bewilderingly unsatisfactory manner, characters acted entirely out of character, beloved story arcs were abandoned, and the core relationships that had developed over several seasons were discarded like yesterday's news. It felt personal, like the creators had flipped the bird to all the fans who had invested emotionally and financially in the series. I spent that entire night tossing and turning in bed, the disappointment gnawing at me. Everyone else seemed to shrug it off, chalking it up to artistic freedom, but I couldn't shake the sense of betrayal. I finally decided to write an impassioned letter to the network, pouring my heart out about the discontent amplifying among the fanbase, wondering if they understood the consequences of their choices. Deep down, I knew it was just a show, but as I watched my friends spark up the next day about a different series, a hollow feeling settled in. I had hoped that my voice could spark some change, or at least get a response, but instead, I got silence, and I felt simultaneously mature and ridiculous for having staked a part of my identity on a fictional narrative. The punch to the gut feeling persisted for weeks. One evening, I found myself at a local cafe tucked away from the world, nursing a cup of herbal tea, when I overheard two baristas discussing their own feelings about the episode. They were joking about how they had been let down, but their banter soon spiraled into what those characters could have done differently. I felt an unfamiliar camaraderie. Leaning over, I pitched in with my own thoughts, and soon the conversation grew like wildfire, echoing our group's frustration but freeing me from my solitude. People I had never met were validating my feelings, and it struck me that perhaps I wasn't alone in my disillusionment with the show. I posted on a fan forum, seeking a space to air my grief, and found a chorus of voices just as disappointed. We shared theories that could have salvaged it all, and gradually, the weight of disappointment began to lift as we created our own alternate endings. It became therapeutic. Instead of focusing on the betrayal, we forged new paths for the characters and laughed together about the absurdity of it all. Each day brought fresh creativity, a collection of plot lines that would ironically remind us why we loved the show in the first place. In the end, though Through the Veil stumbled, a community emerged, stronger than any one individual, allowing us all to heal and find joy elsewhere. Reflecting on that time, I realized that sometimes the biggest middle finger to fans is just an opportunity, a prompt to explore why those stories mattered so much and to create new worlds together in their absence. Update: a few months later, I was authentically surprised when the showrunners announced they'd be revisiting the series with a special episode based on fan submissions. My heart raced, the mixture of hope and skepticism washing over me, but this time, I approached it differently. Whatever dark corner the show might lead me down, I could, at least, revel in my creative escape. As I settled into my dimly lit living room, clutching a steaming mug of chamomile tea, I could feel a blend of excitement and trepidation coursing through me. After the initial uproar and disappointment regarding the show's abrupt end, the announcement of a special episode rekindled a flicker of the passion I once felt for the characters I had followed through thick and thin. The past months had seen me diving headfirst into fan fiction, sketching scenes, and reconstructing plots that breathed new life into the narrative universe. Each late-night writing session became a refuge, a place where my frustrations transformed into vibrant tales colored with hope and nostalgia. However, the thought of the showrunners finally acknowledging their fanbase left me second-guessing my feelings. Would they genuinely listen to the voices of those who felt overlooked, or would this be another misstep, a tempting distraction that carried the same bitter aftertaste? The day arrived when we were told to submit our ideas, and the excitement spiraled into a backdrop of anxiety. I poured out my heart into a story that melded my favorite plot lines, reuniting characters who, in my mind, deserved a second chance, a reunion that carried the weight of unfulfilled promises. I let minutia roll off my fingers, building landscapes of gripping emotion and unraveling paths that had left me bewildered. The submission deadline passed like a soothing lullaby, and as I waited, I absorbed every drop of hope and doubt that floated into my thoughts. Days blended together, every ping of my phone sent my heart racing, yet returned only updates from friends speculating about the direction of the episode. Months flew by, and at moments I found myself buried under blankets and memories, ruminating about how I might feel when the episode finally aired. Would my favorite characters retain their essence, or would they fall victim to the very fickleness of storytelling I had tried to escape? The day of the premiere arrived like a potent storm, electric and surreal. I paused for a moment at the entrance of my living room, feeling the weight of nostalgia pressing against my chest. I switched on the television, and the familiar theme song echoed, a haunting reminder of what once captivated me. As I watched, the screen danced with images I had hoped for, my submissions were woven like threads into an intricate tapestry, and I felt immersed in the warmth of a familiar hug. In a peculiar yet satisfying turn, they blended fans' narratives seamlessly with their own, elevating the original story while paying homage to what sparked the love in the first place. Each twist, every dialogue sparked joy within me, igniting childhood dreams that lingered just beneath the surface. In true storytelling fashion, the creators took risks that felt authentic, where humor intertwined with heartbreaking moments. I could feel my heart racing in tandem with the characters' journeys, their growth compelled me, igniting a fierce desire to cheer for them all over again. When the credits rolled, I finally exhaled, realizing I didn't just witness the episode, I had partaken in a celebration of community and creativity, a shared understanding that transcended mere entertainment. It was an articulation of everything I had yearned for, dreams woven collectively, which I thought might only ever exist in my notebooks. In the aftermath, I felt lighter as I tossed around ideas among my friends about potential next chapters for the characters. We laughed and critiqued, built and deconstructed narratives with warmth and intimacy, reclaiming the stories in our own ways. The series, which once felt like a betrayal, transformed into a collaborative playground, each suggestion revealing connections that knitted us closer together. As the days turned into weeks, I embraced those feelings of nostalgia without the suffocating grip of bitterness. Instead, I chose to revel in the journey. Looking back on everything, I realized how a supposed middle finger from creators spawned a rich exploration of passion, friendship, and creativity in reclaiming something profoundly shared. I realized, too, that sometimes the stories we hold dear can slip through our fingers, but are never truly lost. They morph into something new, vibrant, and alive, waiting for us to dive back in, ink new tales on blank pages, and create together, like we did. And with that realization, the darkness that once clouded my vision faded, offering a glimpse of endless possibility. Perhaps we are the architects of our stories, even if they're borrowed from the flicker of a screen or the ink of another's pen. With that realization simmering in my heart, I dove into the fan submission process with a mixture of enthusiasm and trepidation. The online forum had become a whirlwind of creativity, buzzing with ideas that both thrilled and terrified me. I spent hours reading how others interpreted the beloved characters, the settings, and the overarching themes that had captivated us, trying to find that spark within myself while grappling with the weight of expectations. Each submission echoed the pads of 1,000 eager feet, pushing against the gates of our collective nostalgia, and I found myself swept up in the wave of brainstorming sessions with my friends. We would gather in my small apartment, the dim light of string lights casting playful shadows on our faces as we combed through our notes and storyboards. We laughed, cried, and sometimes argued over character arcs and plot twists, but at the end of the night, it didn't matter who was right or wrong. We were creating together, breathing life into the void left behind by the showrunners, who had so abruptly disregarded our efforts. Eventually, I decided to submit a story that centered around a character who had long been a point of contention in the series. Once hailed as the most compelling part of the narrative, her disappearance in the latter seasons left many fans disheartened. It felt like a betrayal to cast aside such a rich and vibrant character, and so I chose to give her a tale of resilience and rediscovery, one where she stumbled upon a forgotten part of the world that held echoes of her past adventures. I could see her standing atop a cliff, reminiscent of the courage she had always shown, gazing out upon a vast horizon. Crafting her journey led me to confront my own feelings of abandonment, to explore what it meant to be loyal to something that seemed to have moved on without us. Weeks passed in a flurry of submissions from fans across the globe, a tapestry woven from the threads of different imaginations. I kept checking the updates on the show's fan page, each announcement stoking the fires of anticipation and anxiety. Finally, the moment arrived, the day they would unveil the chosen fan submissions that would shape the special episode. I sat in my living room, surrounded by crumpled pages and used coffee cups, feeling as if the walls were tightening around me as I waited for the announcement. When the clock struck noon, chills crept up my spine, the live stream began to fill my screen, the familiar logo flashing before my eyes like an old friend I had almost forgotten. As the showrunners shared their gratitude for the outpouring of creativity from fans, my heart pounded anxiously in my chest, each beat a reminder of how vulnerable this experience had made me. They began revealing the titles of the chosen stories, and each name echoed my growing hope, a series of breaths caught in my throat. My fingers tingled with disbelief when the host announced my submission, and for a moment, I felt suspended in time. The world outside faded away, the disgrace of the past replaced by a sense of belonging and validation. I had poured myself into those pages, and now, here I was, about to see my words transformed into a living, breathing segment of a universe that once seemed out of reach. The special episode was set to air a month later, but what lingered longer than the excitement was a profound shift within me. I had realized, through the act of creation, that storytelling possesses an innate power, one that connects people across their myriad experiences and fragmented relationships. I had become part of a community that thrived on shared passion, rebuilding something we loved from the ground up. The day the episode finally aired felt almost ceremonial. I gathered my friends once more, this time transforming my home into an impromptu viewing party, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of popcorn. As the episode unfolded, I watched with bated breath. The familiar score began, and with it, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. My heart swelled as my character emerged on screen, her story intertwining beautifully with the beloved narrative threads that had initially captivated us. It was as if our plans had harmonized with the creator's vision, creating something richer and deeper than any single contribution. I realized then that this moment wasn't about vindication, it was about reconciliation, not just with the creators, but with myself, my journey, and the stories I still carried within. And as I sat there, surrounded by laughter and joy streaming through every corner of my living room, it struck me that every ending leaves a space for new beginnings. The series had re-entered my life, not as a hollowed-out remnant of the past, but as a vibrant pulse that beat among us again. It was a gentle reminder that while stories may wane, their essence never truly fades. In our hands, they can always take flight once more. Update: in the weeks following the episode, an unexpected camaraderie blossomed between the fans, the showrunners, and even the actors who began to engage with us once more on social media. It felt invigorating to share in a collective appreciation, to dissect plot twists and character developments alongside those who once felt like strangers. The show had transformed into a collaborative creation, and, as someone who once felt on the outside, I finally felt at home. Together, we filled the void with renewed passion, with a promise that even when our favorite narratives twist unexpectedly, it's up to us to keep pouring our hearts into new stories, continuing the legacy of something we cherished. In the end, my biggest takeaway? That sometimes, the middle finger turns to a high five, and the stories we love are as much ours as they are the storytellers, ever evolving, ever bright. In recent months, a strange sense of unease has settled in like a thick fog over my small suburban town, wrapping around the familiar streets and houses, suffocating the vibrant spirit we all once took for granted. I suppose I've always considered myself a typical American, blissfully navigating through life with a steady job at the local library, sharing coffee breaks with my fellow workers, and spending weekends stargazing in my backyard with my son, Ethan. But now, as I find myself scrolling through online discussions on platforms like Reddit, I can't help but wonder, how does it truly feel to be American these days? It started with simple conversations with friends, who seemed more reclusive than usual, avoiding discussions that led into anything resembling politics or current events. But then came the day when Ethan approached me, his young brow furrowed, asking, "Mom, why are so many people arguing and fighting on the internet?" His innocent question hit me like a punch to the gut, and I mentally scrambled for an answer that would reassure him. You see, I didn't have an immediate response. All I could muster were vague remarks about differing opinions and the complexities of the world. As the days went by, I noticed the tension amongst the community growing. People would look past each other in the grocery store, the air thick with a palpable sense of frustration, and even the town's annual fall festival felt muted, as though joy had taken a backseat. I often sat on my porch, watching neighbors walk their dogs, and imagined sharing a friendly chat, yet it seemed like an impossible task to breach the uncomfortable distance that had formed between us. Then one evening, as I was stirring up a pot of chili, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Henderson from next door, her face creased with worry. She asked if we could talk, and I've never seen her look so vulnerable. As we sat on the front steps, she revealed how scared she felt for her grandchildren, growing up in a world that seemed increasingly divided and hostile. It stirred something in me, a delicate yearning for connection amidst chaos, and without thinking, I confessed my own worries about Ethan, sharing my uncertainty about how to explain the complexities that surrounded us. To my surprise, she responded with a softness that I had almost forgotten existed, and what started as a somber conversation about the state of the world slowly transformed into a cathartic sharing of hopes, fears, and our shared belief in raising a kinder, more empathetic generation. Over the next few weeks, we founded a small weekly gathering in our backyards, inviting other parents, feeling the warmth of camaraderie blossom where once there was trepidation. Each meeting offered us a chance to express our concerns, share our joys, and it felt as if we were knitting a safety net out of laughter and camaraderie. As the seasons changed and we transitioned into winter, we exchanged stories under the street lamp's soft glow, occasionally touching upon our thoughts about the country and the constraints we felt entwined in. That sense of community was reflected in the spirit of each gathering. Among the laughter and shared snacks, we gradually built the courage to discuss, listen, and understand each other, igniting flickers of hope in our hearts. I found comfort in knowing I wasn't alone in navigating this tangled web. Instead, we were hand in hand, illuminating each other's paths. With time, I realized that being American had shifted significantly for me, not in a grand, political way, but on a more intimate, personal level. In seeking connection during turbulent times, I had embraced a sense of belonging that made me proud despite the chaos outside our doors. I often reflect on that initial worry Ethan expressed, knowing it ignited a series of fortifying conversations that transformed our little town. As we gathered around warm lights and shared pies, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over me. Perhaps all it required was vulnerability and openness to rebuild our sense of community. So, how does it feel to be American these days? It feels like leaning into the discomfort, fostering connections, and believing in the shared humanity that binds us, despite the discord swirling around us. It's not perfect, and the journey is ongoing, but I've come to learn that togetherness, even amid uncertainty, can pave a path towards healing. Update: just last week, we had our regular gathering and asked everyone if they wanted to keep meeting, even after the holidays. Our conversation was filled with excitement, and we decided to start a community project where we write letters to local lawmakers about our hopes for the future, inviting our children to participate. The response was overwhelming. Who would have thought that a little chili and some honest conversations could evolve into such a collective purpose? Looking back, I see that this experience not only helped to mend the rifts in our community but also rekindled faith in the possibility of change, one small bond at a time. As we embarked on this new journey of engagement, I often found myself in the company of friends who were once mere acquaintances, and each gathering felt like a gentle tug on the frayed edges of my heart. The project soon transformed into a monthly affair, a sanctuary where voices that had long been hushed could finally speak out. Our letters became vessels of hope and dreams, carrying the weight of our children's futures along with our own aspirations. I remember the first time we gathered to write together. The air was thick with anticipation and warmth, a poignant reminder that shared spaces could replace walls. We sat around folding tables under the soft glow of string lights, the smell of fresh coffee mingling with the crisp scent of paper and ink. Children laughed and played nearby, occasionally sneaking glances at their parents, curiosity sparkling in their eyes like stars just before dusk. As I helped my son spell out his thoughts on education, life lessons chin deep in youthful wisdom, I felt something shift within me, a nostalgic warmth growing in the pit of my stomach. There was a beauty in the banality of it all. As we shared stories about our daily lives, the burdens of our individual struggles felt lighter, turned into fleeting whispers between friends. Each letter we penned took on a life of its own, a story of resilience wrapped in the inked hopes of a community eager to be heard. We began sending our letters not just to lawmakers, but to local newspapers, transforming our words into a symphony of resolve and solidarity. Slowly but surely, our group started finding its voice, an echo of thought that resonated far beyond our suburban corner. There were moments of doubt, of course, conversations about the intricacies of social change and the daunting nature of governmental responses made us question our impact. Would our words even matter? But with each passing month, responses from lawmakers began pouring in, each letter sparking a flicker of hope that urged us forward. One particularly chilly evening, we received a response that still brings goosebumps to my arms. It was from a state senator, acknowledging our letters, commending our efforts, and inviting us to a community forum to discuss our ideas further. I could hardly breathe as I read it aloud to the group, faces lighting up with an electrifying mix of disbelief and excitement. Our meetings became not just a hub for discussion but a safe harbor, a place for unfiltered honesty where parents could voice fears about the rising costs of living, and children could dream of safer schools and brighter futures. It was cathartic, to put it mildly. There was a sense of purpose that had eluded many of us for years. By engaging with our lawmakers and pushing for change, we were igniting a passion for advocacy within our kids, teaching them that democracy was not a distant concept but a tool within their reach. As the end of the year approached, we held a holiday gathering that felt less like a project meeting and more like a warm family reunion. We decorated the community center room with handmade ornaments, each one a testament to the unique hopes and dreams of local families. Laughter and joy filled the air, a stark contrast to the noise of division that once echoed throughout our neighborhood. The culmination of our efforts, a special letter addressed to the entire community, was displayed prominently on the main bulletin board, a beautifully penned summary of the ideals we stood for and an invitation for others to join us. When I stepped back to observe the smiles spreading across so many familiar faces, the laughter of children echoing like the sweetest harmonies, I realized how far we had come. In channeling a desire for better, we had stumbled into an unexpected camaraderie, forging relationships that challenged our preconceived notions and quietly reshaped our worldview. I didn't just see neighbors anymore, I saw friends, allies in a journey that sought something greater than ourselves. Months passed, and with each communication we exchanged, I felt lighter. I had wrestled with the notion that being American in this climate felt isolating, a relentless tide of division pulling us apart. Yet, in creating this project, I had discovered slices of hope rooted in unity and shared purpose. We might not solve all the world's problems overnight, but we had fostered a sense of belonging and possibility in a way that I hadn't realized I needed. Reflecting back, I now understood that being American today was not just about grappling with the headlines or the chaos that often filled our screens. It was about connecting with those around us, sharing our aspirations, and standing together for what we believed in. I found solace in community, the belief that change could be cultivated in small moments, like taking the time to listen, to reach out, and to warm a neighbor's heart over a pot of chili. So, as the seasons turned and our project continued to flourish, I welcomed each new day with an open heart and a mind eager to listen, grateful that sometimes it is in the collective that we find our individual strength. Update: just a few weeks after our final gathering of the year, the senator invited our group to the state capitol. It was a surreal experience, sitting in a large conference room surrounded by those once deemed unreachable. We presented our letters, our hopes, and our children's dreams. The room was charged with a palpable energy, one that urged us onward into uncharted territory. As we left, the weight of responsibility settled comfortably on my shoulders, replacing the burden of isolation I had carried for so long. It felt as if we weren't just faces in the crowd anymore, we were part of something larger, a movement fueled by unwavering belief in our ability to instigate meaningful change. Who knows what paths lie ahead or what stories remain to be written, but I am learning to embrace each moment, knowing that the journey often begins with a simple act of connection and a shared bowl of chili. As the weeks turned into months, each meeting brought more people and more stories to our gathering. We began to see familiar faces, those of the baker from down the street, the retired teacher who once ran the local after-school program, and even the barista from the cafe where I used to grab my morning coffee in isolation. The warmth of our little coalition created an inviting space that felt like home. We established a rhythm. Each session began with the aromatic scent of chili simmering on the stove, vegetarian for those who preferred it, and transformed into an informal think tank where ideas flowed as freely as laughter. I discovered that sharing our individual stories over a warm meal could illuminate the common threads woven through our lives, revealing shared hopes, fears, and dreams. One evening, a young mother named Sarah brought her daughter, a bright-eyed girl with wild curly hair, who approached me with wide eyes, curious. "Why are you all writing letters?" she asked innocently, clutching a crayon in her tiny fist. That question lingered in my mind long after the evening ended. Her simple curiosity reminded me of the impact we were having not just on each other, but on a generation that stood to inherit our future. So, we decided to invite children to contribute their thoughts as well, incorporating a segment where they could draw or write about their hopes and dreams for the community. Each week, the role of our project expanded. The letters we penned soon adorned the walls of the local government office, becoming a collection of voices, and when they received responses, they were read aloud with pride, each reply igniting sparks of hope within us. This entire process transformed not just our community, but me personally. Gone was the uncertainty I once felt, in its place grew a newfound sense of purpose that was both invigorating and humbling. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. As we became more visible, we also became subjects of scrutiny. Some in the community disapproved of us channeling our grievances and pleading for change publicly, arguing that we were merely stirring up trouble. We faced backlash from some who believed our efforts contradicted the established way of life, and a few called us naive dreamers, unable to see how deeply entrenched problems were. It wasn't easy to hear harsh comments and judgment from those who used to share our space. Feelings of resignation would often sneak in at night when I found myself alone, wondering if our efforts could really redirect the course of our local narrative. But every time I felt the weight of doubt creeping in, I'd remind myself of Sarah's question and our group's diverse collection of letters and drawings. They became my anchor. I learned to channel that anxiety into pushing harder, leaning into the discomfort and turning it into a conversation rather than conflict. To my surprise, some of those who had initially criticized began to join our discussions, more curious than combative. There was a palpable shift towards understanding, and the ties that once felt fragile began to mend. Eventually, we organized a community event called A Day for Tomorrow, which showcased the letters in a public exhibit, bringing together art, music, and collaboration. Families filled the park, bright colors of happiness around each booth. Kids colored with crayons, each drawing adding bursts of life to the drab, gray spaces that had grown all too familiar. When the sun dipped low in the sky, it cast a warm glow over our gathering, and I felt a profound sense of hope wash over me. That evening, as I sat on the grass, listening to the giddy laughter mixed with hopeful chatter, I understood that the journey wouldn't be over after one event. Our story was unfolding in chapters, each page filled with community, compassion, and connection. Reflecting on this experience now, I hold a profound gratitude for those early chilly conversations that started it all. What began as a simple gathering transformed into a lifeline for many of us. We all learned that embracing change doesn't demand grand gestures but can spring from shared meals, laughter, and understanding. As we continued to write letters and draw dreams for the future, I felt a quiet strength, a collective pulse, propelling us forward. Yes, being American in these times can feel isolating and frustrating, but it is also filled with possibilities forged in the fires of connection, clarity, and community. I've come to realize that every bond we create, no matter how small, moves us one step closer to a better tomorrow, encouraging each of us to ask not just how it feels, but how we can actively shape the narrative together. And as life often does, it nudged us along, never letting us stay stagnant for too long. As I'd sit pondering how much had changed, I realized I was no longer carrying a weight but rather a flame, igniting others along the way. As we continued sharing our dreams, who knows how far this flame could travel. Confession, I, F18, have lived alone for 3 years in my own apartment. It might sound freedom-filled to many, especially those still grappling with curfews and the chaos of family life, but my solitude was woven from threads of loneliness, longing, and something else darker that I hadn't expected. When I signed the lease as a naive 16-year-old, I thought living alone would be a thrilling adventure brimming with newfound independence, but that initial excitement quickly morphed into an unforeseen isolation. My friends drifted away, busy with their own lives, and when I wrapped myself in the silence of my one bedroom, I started feeling like a ghost who haunted her own home. It began innocently enough, the occasional creak of the floorboards in the dead of night, tiny movements out of the corner of my eye that I brushed off as the remnants of a mundane day, when shadows appeared to grow longer. Yet my mind couldn't help but fill those gaps with questions. Was someone else in my apartment? Had I inadvertently invited a paranormal entity into my life through my self-imposed isolation? Just last week, as I curled on my couch with a blanket and a half-empty cup of cold tea, I caught a glimpse of somebody, small and fleeting, scutter behind my bookcase. I froze, my heart racing, and reason told me that it was just a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the confines of my apartment held more than my simple belongings and scattered hopes. Curiosity grew into obsession as I spent my days searching through online forums and haunted house documentaries, tearing apart my sanity in the pursuit of understanding what lurked just beyond perception. Conversations with friends now consisted of nervous laughter and vague references to weird things in my apartment, as I tried not to show them how deeply unsettling the idea of my living situation had become. Then came the night I finally mustered enough courage to confront what I believed hid within my walls. Armed with a flashlight, I stood in the dim glow of my living room, my heartbeats echoing louder than any noise of the night. I ventured towards the bookcase, muttering to myself that ghosts were absurd, merely figments of an overactive imagination, and carefully, I tilted the furniture enough to peer behind it. My breath hitched as I saw not a ghost but a collection of items, a small, tattered teddy bear, a threadbare blanket, and crumpled pieces of paper covered in scribbles. They were dated, each note a fragment from someone's life squeezed into the space I had thought was solely mine. The notes told a story of sorrow, of someone who had lived there before me, trapped in an unbearable life, and after reading them, I felt a burgeoning empathy for the spirit that once inhabited my home. I realized that my isolation had echoed theirs, a continuous void that gnawed at the edges of happiness. As the days turned into weeks, I began writing letters to that person, sharing my fears, my dreams, and my confessions, about loneliness, about resilience, about wanting to reclaim the space where darkness had once settled. In those late-night scribbles, I started to feel a shift within myself. The burden I had carried began to lift as I bared my soul to the whispers that haunted my hallways. One letter brought an unexpected sense of closure. I realized I could take control of my own narrative instead of allowing the narratives of others, those who had left pieces of themselves behind, to dictate my life. I chose to embrace the solitude, to restore joy within the echo of silence rather than fear it. I decided that it was time to breathe new life into my apartment. Colors replaced the chipped walls, plants breathed verdancy into the once stark corners, and each adjustment felt like a step away from the ghosts of my past, toward a future filled with light. As for the lingering remnants of whoever had come before me, I left their notes nestled in a box with the teddy bear, placing it on a shelf I reserved for cherished memories, reminding myself that our pains often intertwine but do not define us. For the first time in years, my home truly felt like mine. I am no longer living alone, I am discovering myself, and perhaps that was the most profound resolution of all. I know that others may have struggled in similar spaces, so I want to share this tiny epiphany with them. Loneliness can spark fear, but it can also ignite a journey of self-compassion and understanding. Update: a couple of weeks after writing those letters, I woke up to the doorbell ringing persistently. I opened it to find a delivery driver with a package that bore my name. Inside was an unassuming frame, holding my favorite note from that box. Someone had found it and sent it with a sweet card that simply read, "You matter." It might have been a complete coincidence, but in that moment, I felt a sense of connection to the world that I never thought possible in my solitary apartment. I smiled, acknowledging the spectral whispers but no longer captive to them, allowing instead the gentle reminder of belonging to guide me, my once lonely refuge transformed into a sanctuary. This simple act of kindness sparked something deep within me, a flicker of warmth I hadn't felt in years. It was as if the universe was gently nudging me to acknowledge that this solitary life I had carved out wasn't just an existence filled with shadows, but a story filled with possibilities, marked by the serendipity that brought that note back to me at just the right time. Instead of wallowing in my solitude, I found myself daydreaming, imagining connections, friendships, maybe even a sense of community. The thought of meeting someone new didn't seem so daunting anymore. After all, had I not just received a message from a stranger that resonated deeply with my heart? The next day, I ventured out, a little timidly, but with a sort of hopeful determination that was new for me. I stepped into the small cafe down the street from my apartment, the Nook. It was cozy, with the faint aroma of coffee and pastries wafting through the air, wrapping around me like a warm hug. I ordered a chai latte and found myself a corner seat, where I could observe the life bustling around me. I watched people laughing together, sharing stories or moments of quiet companionship, and it reinvigorated a sense of excitement within me. I was struck by the realization that each of them had a story, just like mine, full of struggles and small victories, sheltered within their laughter and chatter. I picked up my journal and began to write, letting the words flow freely from my head to the page. I poured everything into that small notebook, my silly fears, hopes, and musings about life, weaving the fabric of my lonely nights into something vibrant, a tapestry of my solitude transformed. As I left the cafe that day, I felt lighter, a swift breeze danced around me, as if it too was whispering encouragement. Days turned into weeks, and I started making this a routine. My infrequent visits to the cafe blossomed into warm exchanges with the barista, Jennifer, who always remembered my order and threw in an extra pastry on slow days. Then there was Michael, an artist who frequented my corner table, sketching the patrons, and who eventually joined me one afternoon, sharing snippets of his artistic journey while I shared pieces of mine. Each interaction chipped away at the walls I had built around myself, and slowly, I began to see my apartment less like a fortress and more like a resting place, a canvas to dream on, instead of hiding within. I meticulously filled my space with mementos from an enriching life, photos of us laughing at quirky art shows, postcards from old friends, and even framed snippets of conversations that struck a chord. I still had the spectral whispers, but instead of haunting me, they enveloped me in a comforting embrace, an acknowledgement that I was not alone in my experiences anymore. I was a part of something greater, a beautiful life tangled with shared stories, laughter, and creativity. It was one evening, under the soft glow of warm string lights on my balcony, that an unexpected message lit up my phone. It was from the same anonymous number I had received the note from all those weeks ago. My heart raced as I read, "Hi. Where can I send another little something? It felt good to connect, and I would love to remind you again that you matter." My breath caught in my throat, that same warmth rushing back through me, not quite believing the world could be this kind. We exchanged a few messages that evening, the conversation so genuine and easy, as if we had known each other forever despite that initial anonymity. And just like that, a new friendship emerged, filled with laughter and support, reminding me that sometimes, amidst the fog of loneliness, it takes just one little connection to illuminate the path back to oneself. The specters of my past still visited, but now, they merely served to enhance the pieces of life I was reclaiming, quiet reminders of where I had been, which now felt like distant echoes against the symphony of laughter and companionship I was cultivating. I closed my eyes that evening, the cool breeze lightly rustling the leaves, and I smiled softly to myself, feeling a profound sense of belonging within my heart. And even though I had embraced solitude in the past, I was learning to dance a delicate waltz between presence and absence, discovering beauty in both the quiet times alone and the raucous laughter shared. A few weeks later, I received another note, this time not anonymous but signed, Kara, who turned out to be the mysterious sender who had ignited this journey of self-discovery. And though I still cherished my moments of solitude, I had finally learned that reaching out for connection wouldn't drown out my independent spirit but rather complement it. As the seasons shifted outside my window, so too did my perspective, as I rested comfortably in this place I now called home, my sanctuary, filled with the echoes of laughter, art, and an unshakable sense of belonging, a reminder that amidst the chaos of life, we always have the choice to nurture both solitude and companionship, creating a tapestry that is uniquely ours, interwoven with every meaningful connection we dare to make. With the arrival of that unexpected package, a seed had been planted deep within me, urging me to extend my hand beyond the boundaries of my cherished solitude. It was a kind of quiet revolution that felt secure, as if the walls of my apartment had started to lean in a little closer, helping me embrace the world outside. Days turned into weeks, and as the last vestiges of winter surrendered to the warmth of spring, I found myself living harmoniously with my new mindset. The park nearby, once a neglected thought, became an inviting breath of fresh air where I would occasionally. I still remember the summer of 1998, the air thick with humidity and anticipation as I sat at my family's clunky desktop computer, the faint whir of the fan mixing with the sounds of cicadas outside my window. I was 14 then, navigating the tumultuous waters of adolescence, and computer games were my escape, my safe haven from the befuddling maze of high school drama and insecurities. The game that sticks with me most is a whimsical little thing called Myst, an adventure that stretched my imagination like never before. Immersed in its elegant, surreal landscapes, I found places that felt more real than my everyday life, each click exploring a new dimension of intrigue and mystery. But it was more than just pixels and puzzles, it became a means of connection, a bridge to my brother Adam, who was 3 years older and often wrapped up in his own world of teenage angst. He would sit beside me, offering guidance when I got stuck or simply sharing his newfound theories about the game's story, our bond deepening with each island we discovered together. It wasn't long before the game began to mirror our real lives, each quest delicately paralleling our unfolding relationship. Yet, when adulthood began to call Adam away to jobs and responsibilities, I noticed a gradual, almost imperceptible shift. Weekend gaming sessions dwindled, often replaced with his late-night shifts at the gas station or hangouts with friends. I felt an unshakable sense of loss, like a favorite book closing after the final chapter. One rainy evening, when solitude wrapped around me tighter than ever, I revisited Myst, hoping to recapture that ephemeral magic. As I navigated its quiet halls and stunning vistas, I was struck by the changes in me, and the realization that the game wasn't just an escape, it was a story about connections, about journeys taken with those we cherish. After completing several islands solo, I decided to reach out to Adam. Over text, I invited him to jump back into the game with me one weekend, hoping to rekindle a piece of the childhood camaraderie we once had. Much to my utter surprise, he replied almost instantly, his excitement ringing through the words as he recalled our adventures together, and just like that, we planned a gaming marathon for the following Saturday. When that day finally came, there we were, side by side once again, uncanny echoes of our younger selves filling the living room as laughter and strategy flowed freely. As we explored a world built on connection, I realized that sometimes, life's greatest quests are those that bring us back together. In the end, Myst was more than a game. It was a reminder that bonds can fray but never truly break, provided we're willing to return to the roots of our connection. It was comforting, the way we fell into that easy rhythm of conversation and cooperation, the game serving as a catalyst for conversations we didn't even know we needed. As I sink back into that familiar world, I can't help but look forward to what mysteries await us, both in the game and in our lives. Update: after that weekend, we ended up making it a monthly tradition, turning our gaming sessions into deeper conversations about life, dreams, and the things we were too uncertain to voice otherwise. Sometimes, we still get lost in the world of Myst, and every time, it feels like we are unlocking not just virtual treasures, but also the lost pieces of our relationship. It may seem trivial to some, but to me, it was a reminder that sometimes all it takes is a simple game to stumble across the hidden depths of love and connection. As the months rolled on, our monthly gaming sessions became more than just a ritual. They morphed into a safe haven, a pocket of escapism amidst the chaos of our busy lives. I started to notice nuances I had previously overlooked, like how Sarah would lean slightly closer whenever we entered an especially captivating area of Myst, her eyes lighting up with a childlike curiosity that made my heart swell. It was in those seemingly insignificant moments that I understood how deeply intertwined our lives had become. We'd share stories from our childhood while solving complex puzzles, often losing track of time, and in those exchanges, I felt a sense of renewal, as if we were rediscovering each other all over again. But one evening, after a particularly intense session exploring the intricate landscapes of the game, Sarah surprised me with her vulnerability. "You know," she started softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "this game. It reminds me of how much I've been running away from my past." I paused, the glowing screen illuminating her face, casting shadows that danced with the flickering images. My heart raced, and a knot formed in my stomach because I knew her past was a tangled web of heartache and loss, an unspoken shadow looming over our relationship that we had never discussed directly. Encouraging her to share, I shifted closer and squeezed her hand gently. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steady, though I felt the weight of her words hanging in the air like an unseen fog. She inhaled deeply, as if gathering the courage to traverse this new terrain. "I think," she began, her gaze drifting to the screen, "that I've been afraid to get lost in something real again. I felt that with you, but there's a part of me that still feels like I have to keep one foot out, just in case." Her admission hung there, raw and vulnerable, and I felt an intense urge to reassure her. "You don't have to be afraid with me," I said earnestly. "I'm here. We're in this together." I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes waver like the flame of a candle, but still, she held back. The evening drifted on, the world of Myst fading away as we navigated through our own emotional landscape, a puzzle far more complicated than any game could present. Over the following weeks, we began to peel back the layers of our histories during these gaming nights. We made it a point to share not only our dreams but also our fears, pondering the choices that led us down our respective paths. Each session felt less like an escape and more like a step toward understanding each other. I recounted my teenage insecurities, how I'd grappled with acceptance, the sting of feeling like an outsider even in my own friend group, while she shared about her family dynamics, the pressure to succeed, the fractures in family ties that had scarred her trust. As our screens displayed vibrant worlds filled with mystery, we delved into darker corners of our hearts, discovering fragments of ourselves we had kept tucked away until now. Then one night, after a particularly spirited gaming session, I noticed something in Sarah's demeanor. She was quieter than usual, her brows furrowed as she stared at her reflection in the screen, the light casting a strange glow on her face. "What is it?" I asked, concerned that maybe I had pushed too hard. She took a deep breath, breaking the spell of silence. "I think I'm ready to confront my past," she confessed slowly, almost reverently. I could feel my heart race, an odd mixture of fear and pride surging through me. "But I need your help." My stomach fluttered, I nodded without hesitation, eager to support her. "Absolutely, whatever it takes." Little did I know, this commitment would lead us down a road of exploration and catharsis neither of us had expected. We started to create a vision board that illustrated our ideal future and goals, using gaming metaphors to articulate adventures we wanted to embark on, healthy relationships we wished to build, and experiences we wanted to explore together. Eventually, after months of navigating these intertwined journeys of healing, we decided it was time for a tangible adventure. We planned a real-world trip to a nature reserve, an escape as far from screens as possible. It was during that beautiful weekend, under a vast canopy of stars, that we engaged in our most profound conversation yet. Sat around a campfire, we spoke about our expectations of love, the way we envisioned our lives together, and the importance of addressing our fears rather than escaping them. As the fire crackled and the night enveloped us, I finally felt the full weight of Sarah's trust in me, and I understood that the foundation we were building was not a simple one, it was grounded in the courageous act of vulnerability. Months passed, and as I sit here reflecting on that decade-long journey, I realize how deeply intertwined gaming and life have become for us. It's incredible to think that what started as a way to escape ended up being a gateway into deeper connections, a means to confront fears and share dreams. I still don't have all the answers, but I do have her, and that suffices for now. Update: with our newfound understanding, we are considering starting a blog together focusing on mental health through the lens of gaming and storytelling, sharing our experiences and perhaps helping others see that sometimes the most healing adventures can be found not just in the virtual realms, but in the heart of the connections we nurture in the real world. The idea of starting a blog together was something we tossed around casually at first, as we sat comfortably on our couch, our old computer booted up, with the familiar sounds of mist echoing softly in the background. It felt almost surreal how much had changed in our lives since that fateful weekend when I had reintroduced her to the world we used to escape into as teenagers. We previously filled our days with unrelated chatter, but now, our conversations bled into something richer, more profound, each word punctuated by shared laughs and silent understanding. As the months went by, we wrote notes after our gaming sessions, capturing snippets of our thoughts and feelings, like how the island's puzzles made us question our own obstacles in life or how our collaborative approach to the game mirrored how we wanted to face challenges together, in the real world. It was during one of those late-night gaming marathons, as I failed to solve a particularly tricky puzzle, that it dawned on me just how much our bond had grown. She gently reminded me that even in our struggles, there was always a way to approach things from another angle. Her calm reassurances and the way she tilted her head in thought while gaming made my heart swell, and I realized how lucky I was to have her by my side, a partner not just in this moving virtual world but in this unpredictable, beautiful life. We finally settled on a name for the blog, Realms of Reflection. It resonated deeply with us, encapsulating the idea that gaming isn't just about escaping reality, it's also about wrestling with our innermost thoughts and experiences, providing a safe space to explore who we are individually and as a couple. When we published our first post, I remember the combination of excitement and fear swirling within me. The message was simple: gaming could be therapeutic. We shared our journey, the way we navigated through life's challenges, and how our sessions improved our communication and emotional awareness. Each blog entry felt like peeling back the layers of ourselves, exposing our vulnerabilities while inviting others into our shared journey. The warmth of our relationship grew stronger with every comment we received, as fellow readers related to our stories of anxiety and joy, and began to reveal their own tales of love and struggle. It was special to witness the community forming around us, a tapestry woven with shared experiences, making us feel less alone. What truly struck me was a comment from a dedicated reader who thanked us for reigniting her interest in gaming after years of finding it hard to connect with anything. She mentioned how reading about our experiences had encouraged her to pick up an old console and reconnect with her own partner, and the thought that perhaps our words had sparked a rekindling of love in another made my heart ache with gratitude. It was then I knew we were onto something much bigger than I'd ever anticipated. Our online space was not just about us anymore, it had become a vessel for connection, vulnerability, and healing one story at a time. A few months passed, and our blog began attracting a modest following, and with it came invitations to participate in podcasts, panel discussions, and even collaborative projects with mental health organizations. Each opportunity brought both excitement and trepidation. The weight of our stories now had the potential to reach even further. I found myself reflecting back on how a simple game had unearthed so many hidden pieces of my own life, pieces I'd almost lost to the chaos of everyday existence. Being able to share that journey with her was like holding a lamp in the darkness, illuminating the intricacies of our experiences while showing others they too could navigate their unique paths. I'm still navigating my own ebbs and flows, still piecing together the fragments of my fears and dreams, but now I do it with her, and for me, that's more than enough. Then one night, while we sat on our couch in the pale glow of the computer screen, she turned to me. With a twinkle in her eye, she suggested we create a space for people to share their gaming stories, perhaps forming a community where others could glimpse the progression from hardships to healing through the digital and emotional landscapes we explored. I was caught off guard but excited by the prospect. It felt like another adventure eagerly waiting to unfold. As I reached for her hand, the comforting familiarity of that gesture felt historic, like two explorers believing in the infinite possibilities of the paths we walked together. And just as we dove deeper into our ideas, laughter echoing alongside stories of virtual monsters and real demons, and the way we wanted to create meaning through our shared adventures, I felt the weight of everything leading up to that moment lift off my shoulders, making way for a future brightly filled with hope and shimmering with connection. In the end, it all feels seamlessly intertwined, games and reality, light and darkness, fears and comforts. And perhaps, just perhaps, life is a lot like Myst, a puzzle waiting to be solved where every click can lead to an unforeseen doorway, revealing new possibilities while allowing us to form unexpected bonds with each venture. The journey will continue to hold unknowns, but in the midst of it all, I understand I have her, my biggest treasure, my saving grace, and collectively we have people ready to explore their stories alongside us. It was a typical Wednesday afternoon when my daughter, Clara, burst through the front door, her cheeks flushed from fresh air and excitement, the kind of joy only a 10-year-old could muster after a long day in school. "Dad," she exclaimed, her energy swirling around the room like a flurry of bees, "can Anna come over for dinner tonight?" On any other day, I would have jumped at the opportunity to have a friend of hers over, but that particular evening, I had a meeting scheduled that would run late, and Clara's best friend lived a good 20-minute walk away. Balancing work and family life was a constant juggling act, but this seemingly simple question ignited a flicker of guilt deep inside me, forcing me into a mental tug-of-war. "Sweetheart," I said softly, knowing I had to explain without dampening her spirits, "I have to leave for my meeting, and I can't walk Anna home after dinner like you want. I'll be back late." Clara's face fell for a moment, her bright smile wavering, but she nodded with an understanding that belied her age. "Okay, Dad," she whispered, but the disappointment hung thick in the air like a low-hanging cloud. As I prepared dinner, a simple pasta dish that Clara loved, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was letting both her and Anna down. After dinner, Clara felt it was essential to call Anna's parents to confirm she could stay for a little longer, and when the conversation shifted to how I wouldn't be able to escort Anna home, I heard muffled laughter on the other end of the line. "It's only a short walk," Anna's mom assured Clara. "She can handle it." I tried to shake off the sinking feeling in my stomach, but the weight of their reassurances felt like daggers piercing my resolve. I had never been one to shy away from responsibilities, and as the minutes trickled away before my meeting, the guilt morphed into an unsettling storm brewing inside me. What if something happened to Anna on that walk? What if I was the one responsible for that? My anxiety was heightened by the swirling chaos of parental judgment that we often hammered into each other on the schoolyard, the unspoken competition of who was doing a better job. I wondered, had I crossed a line? I genuinely believed my reasons were valid, but the idea of Clara's guilt was unbearable. I began to question whether I was, in fact, the one in the wrong. I eventually left for my meeting, doing my best to focus on the work at hand, yet the thought of Clara and her friend lingered as a whisper in my mind, reminding me of the company I was seeking to avoid. When I finally returned home, Clara was sitting on the couch, still waiting for me, while Anna had gone home, and I could not tell if Clara was sad or just simply tired. "Sorry, sweetheart," I murmured, kneeling beside her, "I know it wasn't exactly what you wanted tonight." To my surprise, she looked up at me with a smile that melted the tension away. "It's okay, Dad," she said simply, brushing it off with a wave of her tiny hand. Anna said she liked the walk. That revelation pulled me back, the bubble of relief rising in my chest. On the surface, it was evident Clara had accepted the situation, yet something deep inside me was still yearning for validation. Was I really the asshole here, or just a dad trying to balance practicalities with his daughter's happiness? I lingered on that question as I tucked Clara in that night, the moon casting a gentle glow through her window, and somehow, I realized that parenting meant navigating the gray areas where decisions could neither be categorized as purely right or wrong. A few weeks later, I stumbled upon a thread on Reddit titled "A Myth Asshole," and I curiously typed in my experience. The responses flooded in, varying from fellow parents who validated my struggle to some who accused me of negligence. As I read through the comments, a peculiar sense of community washed over me. It turned out, every parent has been faced with conflicting priorities, and perhaps, the discomfort that lingered in my chest that night was merely a reminder that parenting isn't about perfection. but rather the love and intention behind our actions. The post received a surprising amount of traction, and as I scrolled through a mix of perspectives, a gentle realization settled in my mind: there's no manual for being a parent, we all simply navigate through the darkness, hoping to find a flicker of understanding along the way. As these thoughts echoed in my mind, I savored the comforting warmth of my supportive Reddit community, reflecting on the multifaceted journey of parenthood, and there, amid virtual strangers, I found solace. It was neither the validation I had craved nor the judgment I had feared, but a realization that what mattered most wasn't if I was right, but that I cared deeply enough to question it in the first place. With that gentle realization still warming my heart, I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, surrounded by the familiar chaos of my daughter's room, a tapestry of colorful drawings and dolls that had long ago discarded their pristine packaging. It was within this sanctuary of innocence and creativity that I began to understand the struggle each parent faces in their own way. I felt a pang of guilt about Rebecca, my daughter's friend, and how I had brushed off her request for a walk home. The faint echoes of their earlier laughter still lingered in the air, and I could almost hear the way the two of them had shouted secrets back and forth while playing in the backyard. It struck me then, that in my own swirling thoughts about chores and dinner, I had overlooked the little things that made my daughter feel secure and connected, and Rebecca too. I remembered how they would share dreams of future adventures while sitting on the swings, eyes bright with imagination. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with soft purples and oranges, I tried to piece together what had truly happened earlier. That day, the moment when I dismissed Rebecca's request so easily. It was a moment softened by the warmth of familiarity, that unwritten bond between parents that often feels too delicate to traverse. Perhaps I had thought it would be too much trouble, or maybe I didn't see Rebecca in the light of concern that my daughter did, an almost extension of our family, a girl who laughed a little louder with us, yet remained apart at times. The outdoors were chilly now, the air carrying a crisp scent of fall that crackled like dry leaves underfoot, and I knew I needed to make things right. Before I had time to ruminate any further, I stood up and slipped on my shoes, the soles connecting with the cool wooden floor offering a jolt of determination. I headed downstairs, fueled by purpose rather than guilt, and opened the front door into that refreshing evening chill. I could still see the faint glow of the streetlights ahead, a warm beacon against the encroaching night. Clutching my phone tightly, I called Rebecca's mother. The line beeped, echoing my uncertainty as I waited for her voice, but when she picked up, she was kind, instead of judgmental. We briefly chatted, exchanging snippets of our days, and when I mentioned how I had been contemplating the walk home I neglected, I could hear the smile in her voice when she responded. It was all so simple, yet I felt the weight of each moment we shared gonna dissolve any lingering worries. She assured me Rebecca had made it home just fine, but before we hung up, I asked if it might be all right if I walked with her to school the next day, just to ensure I was a better neighbor and a better parent. There was a brief moment of silence before Rebecca's mother chuckled. Absolutely, I think she'd love that. As I disconnected the call, the tight knot of anxiety in my chest began to untwist. It was hard to describe, that feeling of connection forming anew in this little community encapsulated by the comfort of nightly routines and the soft glow of streetlights. I found myself wandering through the evening, letting my mind linger on small hopes that seemed very large, as I mulled over the power of small gestures and the simple, intricate dance of friendships. Children, I realized, see everything in black and white, navigating their worlds in vivid colors of love and care, and perhaps it was that innocence I had taken for granted. By the time I returned home, the stars were scattered like tiny lanterns across the sky, and every worry I had momentarily faded into the backdrop of an evening gone to slumber. As I nestled into bed that night, something shifted within me, as if I had shed a layer of my past self. Even in my mistakes, the willingness to act, to reach out, to bridge distances however small, became a quiet fortification around my heart. After all, being a parent isn't about perfection but is rooted in connection and those very moments when we recognize our missteps and find ways to grow. And so, with a grateful heart and a serene mind, I drifted off into a deep sleep, knowing tomorrow would hold new possibilities, both for me and for Rebecca, entwined in this dance of discovery we call growing up. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtain, casting soft patterns across my bedroom walls and nudging me awake. The remnants of last night's insights lingered in my mind like a gentle whisper, reminding me of the intricacies of parenting and the lessons tucked within every moment. I rose from my bed feeling lighter, ready to nurture not just my daughter, but also the evolving bond I shared with her friend, Leah. As I maneuvered through our cozy kitchen, its walls adorned with family photographs chronicling our collective laughter and tears, I heard the familiar patter of small feet along the hallway. Rebecca appeared, her hair a tousled halo and her eyes still heavy with sleep, but brimming with the exuberance of a new day. "Can Leah come over today?" she asked, a spark of enthusiasm illuminating her face. My heart warmed at the sight of her unfiltered joy, and I nodded, already imagining the giggles and games that would fill our living room. But a pang of worry threaded through my thoughts. Would Leah feel welcome? Would she, too, share that flicker of childhood glee? With a determined spirit, I set about preparing for their day together. A fresh pot of cocoa brewing, I arranged some snacks, goldfish crackers shaped like tiny fish and vibrant fruits that glistened in the morning light. I left the door open, listening to the sweet sounds of Rebecca making elaborate plans for their imaginary adventures. Over the next few hours, laughter erupted from the living room, a melody that transformed the mundane into a symphony of friendship. I occasionally peeked in, witnessing a tapestry of imaginative play unfold before my eyes, two young friends engaged in a world they created, a nexus of creativity that blossomed in joyous bursts. But as the clock ticked towards lunchtime, I noticed a fleeting shadow cross Leah's face, a furrow of uncertainty that contradicted her laughter. It tugged at my heart, the instinctive urge to protect my daughter from any hurtful situations. I approached them gently, inviting Leah to help me with preparing lunch, hoping to create space for our budding connection. She hesitated but eventually followed me into the kitchen, her fingers gently twirling a lock of hair, an involuntary gesture that revealed her unease. "You're really good at making art, Leah," I said, trying to bridge the gap with warmth. "I saw some of your drawings the other day. How do you come up with those ideas?" Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise igniting amid the softness of her vulnerability. For a moment, she hesitated before venturing, "I just think about what makes me happy." Encouraged by her response, I nudged the conversation further, weaving in my own experiences with art, how it had helped me find joy during tough times. As we chatted, I noticed her shoulders relax, the tension ebbing away with each exchange. By the time we returned to Rebecca, there was a subtle shift in the air. Leah's laughter rang clearer, buoyed by the sense of acceptance that filled our home. After lunch, the three of us sprawled on the floor with markers, paper, and sticky notes. I watched as Leah shared her ideas with Rebecca, who infused them with her own silly antics. They embarked on a frenzy of creativity, and soon the dining room transformed into an explosion of colors, the lyrics from their favorite songs floating through the air as they danced amid their imaginings. It was in those moments, those delicate and unscripted memories, layered with laughter and imaginative play, that I felt the morning's wisdom coalesce within me. I felt grateful for the opportunity to step beyond my own discomfort. After Leah's mother arrived later in the day to retrieve her, I found myself yearning for a way to continue fostering their connection, knowing it wasn't just about me learning to navigate the complexities of relationships, it was about Rebecca growing into someone who could embrace and understand her friends' emotions, too. I felt that night, as darkness settled gently over our neighborhood, that my heart grew alongside the girls' beautiful friendship. I reflected on the valuable lesson Leah had unknowingly imparted, about how even in our uncertainties, our willingness to listen and create connections formed an unbreakable bond that made us all just a little less alone in this vast world. Resting my head on the pillow, I closed my eyes and anticipated tomorrow's adventures, each day a new page in our story, a story I had the privilege, chaos included, to help shape alongside my daughter and her friends. As sleep enveloped me once more, I found peace knowing we were all just navigating this world together, a circle of support hand in hand as we explored the worth of every little moment, including those imperfect ones where our hearts expanded just a bit more. It was one of those sun-drenched Saturdays in May when everything seemed perfect for a celebration, the kind of day that whispered of new beginnings and the sweetness of life. My wife, Jenna, had spent weeks prepping for her baby shower, her excitement glowing in every corner of our home, from the pastel streamers that adorned the walls to the meticulously arranged table of treats that promised to entice the taste buds of our closest friends and family. I admired her enthusiasm as I bustled around, trying my best to help, albeit clumsily, while my mind was slightly occupied with worries of making everything go smoothly. However, beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect day lay the ripples of an impending conflict, namely my mother-in-law, Sylvia. She was that type of person who could suck all the joy out of a room with just a few careless comments, and I felt a tightening in my chest every time I thought of her arrival. You see, Sylvia and I had always struggled to understand each other. She had her ways, and I had mine, but today it was about celebrating Jenna and our soon-to-arrive little one, and I was determined not to let her overshadow this important moment. When Sylvia finally walked through the door, the bright sunshine seemed to dim just a little as her presence filled the space with a sense of foreboding. Her eyes roamed the room, and it didn't take long for her to find something wrong. The tablecloth didn't match the theme, the cupcakes were too sweet, or perhaps, the baby blew a little too much air when I said it'd be appropriate to hand out pacifiers as favors. I could feel myself tense up with each comment that slipped from her lips, and while I was trying to support my wife, the tension was palpable. Then, 30 minutes into the festivities, the real disaster struck. Jenna was in the middle of a heartfelt speech, thanking everyone for their support, and suddenly Sylvia interrupted her in the most public of ways, launching into a tirade about how she believed that, according to family tradition, Jenna should be using a different name for the baby. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was not just a trivial issue, it was a special moment, and as I glanced at Jenna, her face fell, the excitement replaced with confusion and embarrassment. I felt a rush of protective anger surge through me. In that moment, all the pent-up frustration boiled to the surface. I stood up, my heart racing, and said in a voice that was steadier than I felt, "Sylvia, enough. This is not the time to bring that up." The room went silent, and I could feel everyone's eyes on us. Maybe I shouldn't have reacted so strongly, but seeing my wife's hurt face felt like a punch to the gut. I gestured toward the door, my voice firm. "If you can't be supportive, maybe you should step outside for a moment." I watched her face contort, the shock and disbelief evident, and for a split second, I questioned if I had crossed a line. Still, I remained resolute. Sylvia turned on her heel, storming out of the house with an offended huff, murmuring about how ungrateful we were. The aftermath was a swirl of emotions. Guests buzzed with a mix of surprise and awkward tension. Jenna looked crushed, and I felt a wave of guilt wash over me as I approached her, pulling her into a comforting embrace, wanting to reassure her that I only wanted to protect her happiness. To my relief, she surprised me by murmuring softly, "Thank you for standing up for me." It let a little light back into my heart, and as the celebrations continued, the atmosphere shifted slightly. Jenna's friends rallied around her, lifting her spirits with laughter and light-hearted games, and for a while, I allowed myself to revel in the moment, pushing aside the consequences of my earlier actions. But deep down, I wrestled with the thought of how I'd now probably solidified a rift between my wife and her mother. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and as an evening breeze drifted through our open windows, I felt torn between feeling protective of my wife and maintaining peace with Sylvia. In the days that followed, I found myself spiraling deeper into my thoughts. Sylvia called, demanding to talk, and I had to prepare myself for the confrontation that would follow. Surprisingly, when we sat down to speak, I was struck by her vulnerability. She opened up about feeling left out and the pressure of tradition weighing heavily on her shoulders. Through cautious conversation, I learned about her fears of losing her daughter to motherhood, a pain that resonated with me as I thought about my own parents' transition into grandparenthood. I realized I had acted out of impulse, but it didn't change the past. I still had a loving family that needed to find a compromise. Upon returning home, Jenna and I discussed the possibility of inviting her mother back over, trying to mend the torn fabric of our family before the baby arrived. And so it happened. A few weeks later, we hosted a small dinner, during which apologies were exchanged and an understanding was reached. Things certainly shifted, and they may not be ideal, but for now, we created harmony out of chaos, and I learned that sometimes, love requires a measure of patience and a willingness to listen. In retrospect, maybe I was the asshole for my instinctive reaction that day. Perhaps there were better ways to handle the situation without kicking my mother-in-law out. But I also didn't regret standing by my wife, fiercely protecting her in a moment of vulnerability. Family is messy, and though the road to reconciliation is ever evolving, I now know that sometimes you must navigate through the storm to reach the calm that follows. And every bit of our journey, the laughter, the tears, and the misunderstandings have taught us just how precious this new chapter in our lives truly is. As I sat on my bed that evening, shrouded in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, 1,000 thoughts swirled in my mind, each one heavier than the last. I had replayed that chaotic moment from the baby shower over and over like a broken record, searching for a sign that would confirm whether my instincts had led me right, or if I had truly crossed an unforgivable line. The laughter of our friends and family felt very distant now, fading like echoes in a cavern, replaced swiftly by the memory of my wife's tear-streaked face as she hurried into our bedroom to avoid any further conflict. She was carrying the weight of impending motherhood, stretched tight like a thin thread, and it had taken just a few careless words from her own mother to snap that thread. Seeing her heartache had ignited a fire within me, one that I wasn't sure I could contain. My mother-in-law's unfiltered comments blended with the uneasiness of the day, how she had seemed so determined to insert her perspectives on parenting, as if she was the one digging her heels into the ground while our lives were changing in uncharted ways, a territory that belonged to my wife and me alone. As the evening unfolded, I found solace in preparing a calming chamomile tea. The ritual seemed to slow time, allowing me to breathe in deeply and let the warm scent engulf me. I climbed into bed, the blankets cocooning me in a false sense of security while I waited for my wife to return. Minutes stretched, but just as I began to worry, I heard the softly creaking door hinge, a familiar sound that stirred a mix of anxiety and comfort. My wife, her dark hair tousled and eyes reflecting remnants of sorrow, slipped quietly into the room. She settled beside me, and at that moment, the world outside faded away. We sat in silence, the kind of silence that was both heavy and light, until she finally turned to me, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you really mean what you said?" The question hung in the air, and I felt my heart race, unsure of whether she was referring to my outburst at her mother, or my unending commitment to her. I rested my hand on her knee, wanting her to feel the certainty that buried deep within me, a promise of support and love. "I did," I replied, swallowing hard. "I would do anything to protect you, to give you the space you need to breathe and to enjoy this moment. I just wish it didn't have to turn out like that." Her eyes glistened as she listened, and before I knew it, she was leaning into me, softness enveloping the tension we had been navigating. "I don't think you're the asshole," she finally sighed, and with that, a weight lifted. We spent hours talking, recounting moments of laughter and joy shared with friends that day, allowing ourselves to drown out the negativity that had seeped in. It felt cathartic to process the situation as a team, dissecting my mother-in-law's motives and her unwavering beliefs regarding parenthood. In the days that followed, we tentatively re-established connections with family, recognizing that confrontation wouldn't mend the fragility of the relationships we had nurtured. I called my mother-in-law shortly after our heart-to-heart, a move that surprised even me. Over the phone, feelings bubbled to the surface, empathy and forgiveness teetered on the edge as my throat went dry with uncertainty. I told her my side, we both teetered around our truths, and even though her voice was laced with defensiveness, there were moments of understanding, like threads stitching together the rips in our bond. It was humbling to recognize that the older generation often has their own baggage, fears and regrets hidden behind open mouths, bursting at the seams during celebrations meant for joy. It wasn't easy to navigate those conversations, but every effort became a stepping stone toward healing. Gradually, we created a delicate truce. When the day of the baby's arrival came, weeks later, we stood together, hand in hand, in the delivery room, my wife exhibiting strength I had never witnessed. The moment she held our child for the first time, there were no words to describe the overwhelming rush of love and tenderness that enveloped us both. The air was heavy with realization. We weren't just welcoming a new member of our family, we were forging a deeper connection within our own little world, while learning how to coexist with those we hold dear, despite our differences. As we navigated through the chaos of new parenthood, family visits filled the days, and though at times, the air thickened with lingering tension, we remained vigilant, united in our commitment to each other's happiness. And perhaps that moment at the baby shower, messy as it had been, allowed us to find clarity in our approach to love, communication, and the intricate tapestry of family life. Months later, we embraced the chaotic beauty of parenthood, friends texting late into the night, laughter bouncing off the walls of our once quiet home. The lessons learned from that day remained etched in my heart. I no longer saw motherhood and family as simple constructs that existed in perfect harmony. No, it was a tumultuous sea that required navigating the waves of imperfections, one thoughtful action at a time. Looking back, I would never regret taking my wife's side that day, for it was in that instant I discovered the immeasurable depth of our love. And in the ebb and flow of family life, it became clear to me, as we rocked our newborn son to sleep, that it was well worth the storm I had waded through to find the calm that would follow. As the days turned into weeks following the baby shower incident, the emotional undertow still lingered, even amid the gentle joys of new parenthood. Our son, Caleb, brought enchanting smiles and moments of bliss I'd never foreseen, yet that single, charged moment with my mother-in-law felt like a weight clinging to my chest, an unwelcome cloud hovering over our sunlit days. My wife, Emma, had handled the fallout with such grace. She spoke to her mother multiple times, navigating an apology that I secretly hoped would bridge the gap in their relationship. Though I wanted so desperately to make things right, a quiet part of me felt that my actions were justified. Each time Emma picked up the phone to soothe her mother, I flashed back to that day, reliving my protective instincts, the icy chill of her words when she belittled Emma's fears about becoming a mother. It was uncharted territory for all of us. The little things that had once seemed minor began to feel monumental. As we decorated Caleb's nursery, laughing over colors and themes, I learned a lot about the fragile nature of our lives intertwining. Every department of parenting was steeped in endless questions, yet those moments forged bonds even tighter than I'd ever experienced. I remember specifically one evening, wrapped in a cozy blanket, Emma nursing Caleb while I sat close, watching them share an intimate world of their own. In those tranquil moments, I wiped away insecurities about my role as a father and husband. Those vibrant emotions painted love all around me. But it wasn't long before I could no longer ignore the changes in Emma's demeanor. I noticed the slight downturn of her mouth, the glances she threw towards her phone as if waiting for a message that never came. After a few days of deliberation, I finally asked her if she wanted to reach out to her mother again. Emma sighed, her brow wrinkling as if I'd pressed on a still fresh bruise. "I wish things were different," she finally said, her voice trembling. "I didn't want a rift between us. She was always someone I leaned on." Her admission hung in the air, light but heavy with meaning. I wanted to heal the fracture that my reaction had caused, yet I also grieved for the rift I had helped create, feeling like I had been cast into the rolling waves without a life preserver. Gradually, I came to appreciate that even when we feared failure or confrontation, the need to confront uncomfortable truths was indeed the path toward resolution. One day, I encouraged Emma to write a letter to her mother, to express her feelings as authentically as she could without the pressure of a direct conversation that might stir the tide once more. It seemed therapeutic, piecing together thoughts that had flitted away amidst the chaos of emotions. Watching her pour her heart into that letter ignited a sense of calm in me. Life could be met through love, however imperfect, however messy. Weeks later, I returned home from work to discover Emma sitting in the living room, her expression a mix of anticipation and anxiety. "I heard from Mom," she announced quietly, gripping Caleb against her chest. The love in her gaze was infectious, simultaneously bringing peace and apprehension to my own heart. She explained how the letter had opened a door. The words flowed freely between them as if acknowledging the storm for what it was, without casting blame. Her mother, too, admitted her shortcomings and regret, recognizing the tempest that had brewed without her even realizing it. Their conversation meandered into a heartfelt exchange about expectations and the bonds that can both bind and separate family members. I could sense the heaviness lifting from Emma, creating space for laughter again, for joy, even among our challenges. Perhaps in some strange way, inviting her mother back into our lives would provide the companionship needed, not just for our son's milestones but also for the caregiving that would render our family life richer. Everything led up to the moment when we decided to invite Emma's mother to meet Caleb. On that warm Saturday afternoon, a few delicate clouds drifted across a sunny sky while the laughter of children reverberated through the air from nearby playgrounds. I prepared myself, half anxious but hopeful. Emma's mother arrived cautiously, her hands clutching a small gift, a soft blanket for our son. I couldn't help but see the nervousness in her actions as she approached, aware that old wounds were still healing beneath the surface. However, when Caleb gazed up at her with those bright, curious eyes, I saw something magical happen. Love blossomed amid uncertainty. As they shared clumsy but heartfelt moments in the nursery, it struck me how bridges could be patched and construable walls dismantled in small, careful increments. My heart swelled as I saw Emma guide her mother, pointing to Caleb's tiny fingers, her proud tone showcasing the sweet chaos of our family life. In that moment, I realized that we all carried our storms in different ways, yet together, we could find harmony amidst the noise. By facing not just my mother-in-law but my own fears, I learned that family doesn't come with guarantees, rather, it evolves, beautifully scarred yet resilient through the tides of time. We could only hope for a sturdy vessel, crafted from understanding and compassion, to sail us into calmer seas. And perhaps for now, it was enough.